nguvu yetu.
Good morning, Obets. Can you hear me?
Yes, Eli, I can hear you.
I almost lost you. I don't know where you got that or if you had anything I said.
I didn't get anything you said. I'm sorry.
Pardon me. Good morning and welcome to the conversation on this 25th of August 2024. 2 days as we plan to commemorate the August 27th, 2010, when Kenya received a new constitution. And today we are looking at the constitution at 14 years, the rebirth of a nation. We are hoping to have a very, very good conversation as we welcome eloquent speakers, including my good co-host Obed Oriku. And Obed, good morning to you. I hope you're doing well.
I am well from a wet Nairobi and cold, but happy that we would like to have this conversation, especially on issues to do with the Constitution. It's interesting that the Constitution is 14 years in a few days, and interestingly, people have some of the parts of the Constitution have been mutilated totally, like Chapter 6, that was discarded almost immediately. We promulgated it, and then after that, we've tried to amend it using the back door, tried to do so many things to make changes on it. But this is part of the conversation we're going to have. So I'm looking forward to hearing what people have to say about this. And
Obed, if you're speaking, I can't hear you. I don't know what's happening here this morning. But in the meantime, you've said looking forward to having a very good conversation around the Constitution. There's been attempts to make sure it comes to its full life, but many will argue there's been also instances when the Constitution has been abused and misused, for that matter. Ladies and gentlemen, we do have with us Neto Agostino, Just Sudan, co-leader United Green Movement Party, a Green Kenyan living in his profile, as he says, which is courage. I don't know if it has anything to do with Mazingira, but we'll be finding out in a few. We also have with us Boni Mwangi. Boni Mwangi is an economist and a certified public accountant. I know it is quite early in the morning where he's joining us from, but I do hope he's ready for this conversation. Obed, I want to go back to you and just be sure you can hear me. Can anyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thanks.
All right, looks like Obed is struggling to get me. But Nato, good morning to you. I hope you're doing well.
Morning, Mizani. Yes, I'm doing very well from a cold Nairobi. Thank you very much for having us on the call. I look forward to participation. Thank you.
All right, I equally look forward to having you. But as we wait to have Bonnie join the call, maybe quick one, you looking forward to in this specific morning?
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. The subject of this particular conversation is a very interesting one. We're looking at the Constitution at 14, the rebirth of a nation. So, we can look at that in what I think is a three-faceted approach. Rebirth from the past, which was the old Constitution that we got, then the present, the Constitution 2010 as it's been, and the future, what it holds. So it's possible to look at Kenya's critical junctures from three constitutional epochs, and that's what I really hope that I can have a conversation around when you're ready and you give me the green light. I mean, just to set pace in terms of what I really think the conversation needs, in my view, to look like and sound like. So when you're ready and you want me to go, I'm happy to do that. Thank you so much.
Definitely, Agustino, and I thank you for your calmness, because this is a field you've been in, and people of your nature will generally come here guns blazing, because it's a political conversation. However, before we can proceed, let me just make sure my co-host is ready. Obed, can you hear me?
Yes, I'm now able to hear you.
All right, I don't know who is trying to block you from the talk, but once you are settled in, I'll definitely go to you.
No, I'm
Yes,
okay.
we do.
I can now hear you very well, and if there's any contribution I can make, I'm settled. I have no problem.
Sure, as we do that, let's have Bonnie. Bonnie, thank you for joining the call. As I said earlier on, I know you're joining us from a different time zone, and it must be very early morning for you. But I don't know if uko tayari kuijenga nchi yetu. Welcome to the talk.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me?
You're loud and clear, Bonnie. Good morning.
Good morning. It's 2 o'clock where I am, but I'm excited to be part of the discussion.
Awesome. So let's get this started off. And we're looking at the Constitution at 14 years, and we are labeling this hashtag the rebirth of a nation. So what we're going to do is, if you have something you'd like to contribute, even as we bring in our main speakers, kindly request the mic. We'll have a session to have questions and answers, including contribution from the plenary. But for now, allow me to switch back to Obeds. And Obeds, if you may, kindly lay the carpet for us, because we want to understand where have we come from and where should we be headed. Obeds Oriku, welcome.
Actually, not so much, but the reality is that we had ourselves a Lancaster Constitution that was done before independence, or slightly before independence, and that Constitution was gave us the pace for our independence, and thereafter, almost immediately, we started to make changes on it slowly. Then we ended up in a situation where it was no longer tenable to have that constitution, because it had been mutilated in so many ways. So, and with the one-party system, it was problematic, and there was an agitation for a multipartism. Section 2A of the Constitution was to be repealed, and when that happened, then there was a clamor for a change for the Constitution, which was not easy or straightforward. Many people were hurt, many people were maimed. It was a process that started around the early 90s, which saw a few changes here and there within the Constitution, but then it took so long, remember, until when Yashpal Guy came. There was the IPPG thing that was done to allow people to be able to have elections a certain way and some sense of a democracy or democratic election, so to speak, in quotes. But then the Constitution was still deemed to have given excessive powers to the central government, or they called an imperial presidency, and that way there was still a persistence that we need to do to have a constitutional change, which then happened when Yashpal Guy and his team went throughout the country to get views of the Kenyans and what they wanted change, and that was done. But we also know that the Bomas constitution, in quotes, that was supposed to have come or been, to be, is not necessarily what we have today, but then at least there was a compromise. The Naivasha, there was a Kilifi thing where people went and sat and agreed, and then not Kilifi, but somewhere in Ambo, and then They went to Naivasha. They came up with a product that's a bit compromised, which is what we have today as the Constitution 2010 that we promulgated. And then we know too well that almost immediately after it was done, Chapter 6 was lost. It's a child that died immediately. And thereafter, there's also been a trial by the executive to try and amend the Constitution through the BBI, and that's through the back door. And the courts stood by Kenyans and insisted that the process was flawed, and because of that, it wasn't even possible to do amendments. So we do know that the political class, in their capacity, have been seeking and trying to find a way to make changes in the current constitution. But have we fully, implemented the current constitution, or are there areas that are bad that probably need to be improved? So these are the conversations we need to have today, especially given the fact that a lot has gone into making what we have today as COK 2010. A very interesting document. People call it progressive, and it is progressive. But then the political class probably are still living in the old order, and they do not believe in the current constitution, and that is problematic in itself. They do not believe in the governance system that we have chosen for ourselves. So many things to converse about the current constitution. And at 14, is it old enough to be changed? Maybe. Should we change it now? We have to agree to disagree, and that's why we need to have this conversation. That's how I put it and to the floor, and I'm sure there are others who have a better understanding of this. So hence the meaning for us to have this conversation. To you, Eli.
Indeed, Obez, on the 27th of December 2007, Kenyans will go into election, and a few days later, results will come in, and Kenyans would start arguing about who or who did not win the elections. And to that, sort of the coming up of the uprising of the post-election violence. And that will continue for close to 2 months until they say, no, enough is enough. We need to have some sort of order in this country. And that in itself, one will argue, was the epitome of the coming of the 2010 constitution. Fast forward, on the 27th of August 2010, Kenya will then promulgate a new constitution. And this is a file report by then Citizen reporter and now Champs Media head Alex Chamwada, as filed by Citizen TV. Let's listen in.
We can't hear what you're playing. Are you playing anything, Eli?
Looks like there must be some problems happening here, and pardon me for that. I have forgotten playing it on mute. We'll have that in a second.
At exactly 10:23 a.m., the president made the statement that the country had been yearning for over 2 decades.
I, Y. Kibaki, President and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the Republic of Kenya, declare that the Constitution set out in a schedule shall be the new Constitution of Kenya with effect from the 27th August, the year 2010.
And that was it. And from that day, Kenyans had a new constitution. 14 years later, one would question, have we been able to achieve even a quarter of what we anticipated through that constitution? And that's why, ladies and gentlemen, we are more than privileged to be joined by Neto Agostino and Boni Mwangi to have this conversation. Neto, let's go to you. The moments that Kenya has gone through to achieve what it has achieved, many will say we have made strides. Do you believe that's what we've made as a country? Neto.
Thank you very much, Ilan. So, like I said, I'll try to deal with this particular question in about 4 parts. First, being a student of law at the time when, in between the two constitutions, the constitution that was before this one, the one that had a schedule which birthed the 2010 constitution and also saw the 2010 constitution coming into place. So I had a chance to study, constitutional law at a time when Kenya was really, really in the middle of an interesting, if we want to call it, birth pangs of a nation. So under the old constitution, there were a couple of things. The president was a touring imperial. The president could dissolve parliament. The president would appoint judges. The president would appoint his own vice president. And you remember, President Moi, I think at some point, kept the country without a vice president for as long as he wanted. The director of public prosecutions under that old constitution was exercising something called the power of nolle prosequi, and you remember the then the public prosecutor, Bernard Chunga, used it very properly. They were able to take over cases that they were interested in and, just let those cases fizzle out. So some of those challenges that were there under the old constitution, if at all you really want to look at the first stage of Kenya's rebirth of a constitution, you can then see that, Kenya has come full circle and is doing very well. You remember when President Moi dissolved parliament, just at the moment people are about to discuss the Gaia constitution. So those were powers that Moi had, or the then president had in the previous constitution, which made the president a real touring imperial. If the president discovered that he was unpopular or that things are not going his way, he would just prorogue parliament, have people go to an election, and it will all throw the country into disarray. Those things now were quite a bit sorted out in this current constitution. So yes, indeed, there was a rebirth first phase, where now, under this current constitution, parliament is in charge of its own calendar. If you look at the provisions of Article 102 and 101, it sets that elections of any parliament is going to be in the 5th year, so that we always know that, like, for example, unless something strange happens right now, the next election in Kenya is going to be in 2027, August the 10th, because that's the second Tuesday, 5th year. So that, I think, is a plus for purposes of, Kenya at least being predictable, knowing when the next election is going to happen. The second thing that happened under this current constitution is a very good thing, is the establishment of the Supreme Court, the establishment of the various organs, the other judiciary powers, but also the fact that, the Supreme Court can then issue constitutional advisories, but also listen to the presidential petition. You notice during the Raila Kibaki struggle, when part of the reasons why Kenyans went into the post-election violence, there was no framework in terms of how a presidential petition, for example, would then be contested. So it was back and forth. But right now, part of the rebirth with this current constitution 2010 was the fact that it is now possible and predictable in terms of, if you have a contested election, what you need to do in terms of the procedures in 14 days. The Supreme Court needs to already make a decision with regard to that particular thing. The third thing, which was really a good plus under this constitution, was that the president and the deputy are a presidency, that we know that there's not going to be any gap or lacuna in the presidency. Should, for example, the president retire, the president resign, or something happens to the presidency, we know that the deputy president is going to be president for the balance of the term of the election. So it also creates predictability in terms of the nation, that, the president, like Moi did, cannot then run the country single-handedly, because under the last constitution, if, for example, God forbid, when we did not have a vice president for those many years, if something happened to Moi, then there was nowhere else we were going to go. Kenya was then going to be in disarray. So I think the current constitution, it's a very good plus in terms of, having a predictable way in terms of which power or the presidency in itself is seen. The impeachment process in the current constitution is also fairly elaborate on the presidency. We know if, for example, someone wants to remove the president, or if there are issues around the presidency, it's already very clear in terms of what we need to do. But one of the things that the current constitution heralded, which I think was the strongest of all, is the Chapter 4 provisions of the constitution, which is fundamental rights. Kenyans of the past few days have enjoyed really the right to peaceably and armed picket. The Kenyan constitution gives two sets of rights, which is what has actually made it be called progressive. Not many constitutions around the world, apart from the South African constitution, have something called economic sociocultural rights embedded in the constitution. If, for example, you look at Article 42 with regard to the right to a clean and healthy environment, Article 43 that establishes socioeconomic rights, the right to health, the right to education, the right to water. Ordinarily, in constitutions, those are not things that most constitutions will have, because they are thought more of, rights of conduct rights that require the presidency or the executive to do certain things. So for Kenya to, for example, have the right to attainable health or right to quality health in the constitution, that's very progressive. And, it creates obligations on the part of government to realize those rights. But one of the most fundamental things that the current constitution actually has is, I think, the provisions under Article 24. Which talks about limitation of rights. That you cannot limit rights, and to the extent that, one, it is written in law, but number two, even if you want to limit that particular right, it does not take away the core content of the right that you want to limit. So for example, one of the current debates in Kenya is there's a member of parliament, I think from somewhere in around Embu County, who wants to limit the right to picket. That kind of legislation, for example, is outrightly unconstitutional. Unconstitutional because it takes away the core content of the right to picket. You cannot make a law, if you look at the provisions of Article 24, that limits that right. That is what now makes the Kenyan constitution fairly very progressive, that, there are things you can do, but then you have limitations in terms of the protection of rights. So I really think that it is possible to look at the Kenyan constitution as really one that rebirthed the nation, where, for example, you remember, for us to picket, you needed to write to the OCS. The OCS would refuse or turn you around or deny you the chance to associate, or to just be, you'll be called vagabonds, or people were loitering. Those fundamental provisions were now taken away by this constitution in a way that makes Kenya very progressive. So, because I still have 5 minutes to make the first comments, I want to say two things. What does the future hold? How do we, in this 14th anniversary, what do we need to do? Because we already agreed that we have a progressive constitution. Some of the parts have not been able to be implemented, like the Chapter 6 provisions, and I think Obed spoke very well to it. Chapter 6, Article 73 to Article 80 of the Constitution really states, if at all we just did what those particular article provisions required, that, for example, public office is going to be meritocracy, it's going to be not nepotistic, it's going to be not cronism, Kenya would then be where we want it to be. But now we have...
NATO,
Yes.
I'll allow you to stop at that, because we want to now look at it from what has been achieved and what hasn't been achieved yet. So
Okay.
if you don't mind, you hold it at that. And I want to engage my good friend Bonnie, who has been everywhere looking at the documentations of our monies. And I don't know if this is anything closer to the constitution in terms of the journeys we've made, that even citizens are able to interrogate issues with a lot of comfort without feeling like they are going to be persons of target. So, Bonnie, good morning to you once again. I know you have 1 hour with us to spend and elaborate on the issues you're touching on, but from the economist aspect of this conversation, I would love for you to come and bring us to order in terms of rebirth of a nation. Where are we 14 years later, and what should be done or what has been done? Bonnie. Bonnie, if you may unmute and proceed, please.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, great. Kindly
Awesome.
proceed.
Awesome. Thank you so much again for the opportunity. It's a pleasure to be here. For me, because I'm an economist, I always love to look at things from an economic standpoint. And because the economic affairs of our country right now and the constitution cannot be divorced, I think it's proper to do that. Um, so what I want to do is I just want to rehearse for everybody where we are as a country from an economic standpoint, and then we can take the discussion from there. If you guys remember, 10 years ago, we had just seen of President Kibaki. Many of you remember. I remember because I used to travel to Kenya all the time. And when I will come to Kenya, it was evident the economic development that was happening in the country. Record high approval ratings for institutions, trust in government was high, corruption was low. It was a good time. And so we got our new constitution, and everyone was excited about that. But when I look back at the last 10 years, to me, it's been a very sad thing watching what's happening with our country. When Kibaki left, our country had about 2 trillion in debt. right? So you think of all the development that you saw, Thika Road development, everything else that you saw. Um, Kenya had only 2 trillion in debt when Kibaki left, and in fact, if you look at the first 50 years of our country's life, the most debt that we ever had as a country was 2 trillion, right? Then we got this new structure of government, and within the first 10 years of this constitution and this structure of government, we've gone from 2 trillion in national debt to 11 trillion, right? So you and I are talking right now, we are sitting on almost 11 trillion of debt. And, you know, if you're not, you're not an economist, you might not, appreciate what that means. But let me just give you an example. Given that amount of
Bonnie,
debt,
before you just delve into that,
right?
I'm receiving some concerns.
Mhm.
Some of the audience cannot hear you quite clearly. I don't know if you can switch to handset free, if by any chance, or you're on an extra device. That way, we can hear you much clearer. If that can work for you, please. If that works, kindly show me 100% because I've muted you for the moment. But I would love to hear about the debt issue, Bonnie. Bonnie, you want to proceed? Unmute, please.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, well, you're quite far from your device, but proceed. I
Hello.
think that's the much you can get. Go ahead.
Yes, please.
Go ahead, please.
Okay.
Okay, we'll allow Bonnie to fix himself and then come back to speak to us. But he was talking about the issue of Kibaki's economic agenda and what the 2010 constitution provided for us, looking at the debt history, something that, of course, it's much of an importance to this audience. Obets, before we can see if Bonnie is with us, maybe we can allow Odongo to either ask a question or possibly a short contribution on the issue of the constitution. Obets, does that work for you?
It should, and really no problem. But while at it, um, as we say, we have a very progressive constitution. I also would like to hear how, because I think a lot has been said about Kibaki having been the best president we've had. But somewhat, I feel like he's part of the problem that we have today, especially on coalition governments, because of what happened. He set a very bad pace. So, how do we deal with this problem that we've had consistently of people who are not voted into government and trying to find a way back into government? That's something to discuss about. But I think Odongo can go on and give his opinion.
Good morning, everyone. Am I audible? Am I audible?
Odongo, we can hear you. Please go on and speak.
Um, Good morning, everyone. My contribution to this is, we have come from far. If you look at the history of Kenya and where we are right now, and I think we are still far at the same time because what we thought we would achieve as a nation, we have not achieved it yet. And we have achieved a lot. I don't deny that, but there is much that we still need to do. For instance, in the constitution, we thought that we'll be having the institution that works freely. But if you look at the situation right now, there are institutions that are not working the way they are supposed to do. Like, for instance, just want NATO to help us on this, what we can do, because you see the legislation and the executive are in bed. It's only the side of judiciary is working, but again, I want to blame this on politicians because when the team of Yaspal Guy and those other constitutional experts like Bobby Mukangi were actually doing this, there was push and pull by the politician, including Raila Odinga and his team, Yambombai, that we should not decentralized power. Odinga thought he will be in power because Kibaki was going home. And you see what is happening now. People have managed to mass all the legislature to under him. And Nothing is happening. I think that's the problem we have as a country. What can we do to decentralize power? Because that's the main problem we have in Kenya. What can we do to decentralize power? Because there is nothing working. Everything, all the achievement, whether you want to oversight what exactly what Nani is trying to do now, you see, or this Morara guy, what Morara guy is doing is something that should be even done by the media. Media cannot do such a thing. Why? Because of the centralized power.
Odongo, um, generally, I like the trajectory you're taking. Though we are looking at the current constitution as it's set up, and 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 how what we need to do, what has worked and what has not worked, particularly, so that we don't derail so much from the conversation. What has worked for the current constitution so far? What is it that we enjoy as Kenyans because of the new constitution? Then we can progress into what probably is not working and how we can go about ensuring that we hold the government accountable. I hope that is in order.
Okay. I think we are, I've said, I started by saying we have achieved a lot because you see, several things are now clear. You know?
Odongo, we can hear you.
Uh-huh. I must say, you can see now the constitution, I can say we have the most progressive constitution ever. And everything is set in the constitution that we appreciate. For instance, we can now say a president cannot just come up and now say we have differed with my deputy, I'm firing you. Or president cannot decide now this is what I want to do. Though there is still much to be done. That's my point right now.
Thank you, Odongo. That's good because truly, yeah, there's some element of progress. There's some sort of a complexion that Kenya. Even if you don't like the person you're working with, you have to find a constitutional way to get rid of them. And like the presidency now, we saw what happened in the previous government. We had issues, but they had to finish together. So we request that all speakers, once you come in and you get to the speaker, please mute until you're given an opportunity to speak. Bonnie, you were speaking and we couldn't hear you. I'd like to give you an opportunity to finish your contribution. Odongo, please mute your mic.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, Bonnie, we can hear you.
Awesome. Thanks again, and I'll try to be quick. Being mindful of time here. So, the point I was trying to make is this: from me, given up that I'm an economist, I always like to look at things from an economic standpoint. And in this case, I think it's also appropriate to do that because we have a new constitution that we got in 2010. We didn't really start implementing it until like 2013, 2014. And so we've had 10 years to look at how the economy is working, how the constitution is working. I want to remind you guys about where we are as a country over the last 10 years. When Kibaki left office, we had about 2 trillion of debt, right? So again, I want to remind you guys of all the development that you saw, that you felt during those Kibaki years. The most debt that we ever had as a country was 2 trillion. Today, our country is sitting on 11 trillion worth of debt. 11 trillion, we've sort of added about a trillion shillings in debt every year. And the reason for that is that we are spending more money than we make as a country. So if you look at our budgets every year, we are always short. So we add about a trillion in debt to our balance sheet every year because we're spending more money than we can. And so that's important because what it does is it means that today our country is having to spend about 60% of every shilling that we get as a country to pay interest alone. I'm not talking about paying principal. I'm talking about just paying interest on the amount that we owe right now. So when you think about having a new constitution, thinking about all the rights that the constitution tells you that you have, the right to health care and all of that stuff, it means nothing if a country cannot actually make it happen, right? So if someone tells you you have the right to healthcare, but
you guys are spending 60% of your money paying interest. There's only 40% left before we spend on healthcare, before we spend on education, before we spend on our judiciary, before we spend on national security. When you look at it, there's almost nothing left. So, what is the point of having a new constitution with a lot of rights when it means nothing? Right? That's a question that we have to ask ourselves as Kenyans. You have a new constitution, it talks about a whole bunch of rights that we have, but then when it comes down to actually making it happen, we don't have the ability to do that. So that's the first thing. The second thing I want to mention is this: is good to have. Um, having offices such as, for example, the EACC and the public prosecutor, all those things are important. But if you have people there that are not qualified or that are not people of integrity, it means nothing. For me, I look at what's happening in the country. If I ask you to go back to the Kibaki years, for example, I think that people had more trust in our institutions of government, in our parliament, in our, for example, the cabinet, in courts. We as a people, at least I feel that way, we had more trust in our institutions of government than we do today. If you ask people today, most people think the police is corrupt, the court system is corrupt, the government is full of corrupt people. So we have a new constitution with a whole bunch of rights, but then people's trust in their government and people's trust in the government's ability to function and do basic things such as provide healthcare, provide education, provide security is record low, right? So that's a problem. That's a problem. For me as an economist, I also look at um, whether this new constitution is functioning the way it's supposed to be. I just told you about our country's uh, insatiable debt over the last 10 years. We've grown from 2 trillion to 11 trillion in debt, 450% growth in debt. How is that possible when you have a parliament that is supposed to check the executive branch? If you look at most democracies like the US, right, you don't just get up and raise debt just because you want to, right? Parliament is supposed to be there to tell the government, look, it doesn't make sense for you to raise our debt from 2 trillion to 11 trillion when our ability as a country to sustain that debt, to service that debt, has not improved, right? During the same time period, the 10 years that I'm talking about, we've grown our national debt from 2 trillion to 11 trillion, which is about 450% growth in debt. And when you look at our economy in terms of the GDP growth during the same period, it's a fraction of that. It's about 130%. So you just, think about your own family, right? If your income has only grown by 130%, but your debt has grown by 450%, you're going to have some problems. So if we have a functioning parliament, it will tell the executive branch, you can't do this. This is not responsible, right? But our parliament is not working, right? So again, we have a new constitution, but to me, having a constitution means nothing if, when you look at the actual execution of whatever constitution says, it's not working properly because either you have people that are corrupt, or we have people that don't know what they're supposed to be doing under the constitutional democracy system. It's not working the way it needs to be. So that's a point I want to make sure that I mentioned, that having a constitution is one thing, but having a function.
Am I
is,
losing
is
you, Bonnie?
important. Last point I want to make. Can you hear me?
Now you're back. Okay, go to that last point, and then we can be able to engage
Right.
other speakers. But proceed.
Yes. So
I'm afraid, Bonnie, I cannot hear you.
I think he's probably having a challenge with his network. We can go to other speakers and maybe allow him to speak when he can.
Yeah, let's just, Bonnie, once you are ready, we'll bring you back to speak to us. But before I can bring in Anthony, I see your hand is up, Anthony. Pardon us for a second. I just want to bring back NATO to this talk. And NATO, you have listened to Bonnie stating that unless we have all these bodies effectively delivering on their duties. I'm paraphrasing what he said. We cannot brag about a new constitution. And NATO, when you were making your opening remarks, you were very eloquent enough to state that we have seen change based on the independence constitution, on how parliament performs, the predictability within the political powers and calendars and what have you. Do you share the sentiments of Bonnie that it doesn't mean anything if we cannot have the basics of what we dreamed of as Kenyans? NATO.
Thank you very much. I'm happy that Bonnie is looking at Kenya from an economist lens. I am looking at Kenya from a legal lens. But what Bonnie says is a very important thing. In legal parlance, what Bonnie is saying is that Kenya has a constitution, but Kenya lacks constitutionalism. That is what it's saying, and I think that's a proper point to make. That we have a constitution that we are not able to live. We're not able to live the aspirations of the particular constitution because of many things. And one of the reason why we're not able to live that is because of something that Odongo said, but I also want to dovetail it in terms of what Bonnie is saying. Parliament as an institution has failed Kenyans completely. Why? On the issue of debt, for example, Parliament, you see under Article 229 of the Constitution, Parliament is supposed to be, for example, interrogating public debt every year and looking at Auditor General's reports with regard to those recommendations and also intervening. That's number one. Number two, Parliament is supposed to be in charge of the debt ceiling of the country. And the fact that Parliament has left that to go, that the debt ceiling is continuing on a spiral, is also a problem on the part of Parliament. So it is true that, yes, Parliament, it's already in the Constitution that, for example, Parliament needs to be checking on the public debt. It's also in the Constitution that Parliament is supposed to be checking on the debt ceiling, but Parliament has failed its role. So in this sense, the safeguards, the provisions are in the Constitution, but Parliament has refused to do that. Why is that so? That brings me to the point that Odongo was saying. And so if you allow me, let me just take you there. You see, the reason why Parliament is not able to do what it is doing, it is because this current constitution gives us those institutions, but it does not make the institutions inclusive political and economic institutions. I will explain. You see, for us to have inclusive political institutions, right now, the way the Kenyan constitution is constructed is such that, we are not parliamentary, we are not a presidential system. It's a mongrel. No one is able to understand what we have in terms of a constitutional safeguard. And someone said it very well. If you have a presidential system of a constitution, there are safeguards that come with it in terms of how then do you make that particular system efficient. If you look at the presidential system in the US, you notice that there are always midterm elections. Those midterm elections of senators, of members of Congress, is a safeguard. It helps check the presidency. The mistake that the Kenyan constitution has is that, number one, we conduct all our elections at the same time. The presidency, the members of parliament, and all these stages. So we campaign on a six-suit premise. Yet, we want to be a presidential system of government. What that does is that it suffocates the space of the members of parliament in terms of conducting the oversight role, because then they come in as either UDA, as ODM, or as UGM. It is then difficult because you've campaigned with President Ruto, President Raila, President Obeid, for example. It then becomes difficult to turn around and see how then you're going to check your own president. It is very difficult for UDA members of parliament to check the presidency. But if, for example, Kenya, having chosen a presidential system of government, was then going to have a midterm election, I'll tell you what that would do. If, for example, ODM or UGM or Wiper sees that President Ruto is already president, we have a midterm election to elect members of parliament. We now cannot remove him in these 2 years, but we want to go and check him. What that does is that now we have more members of UGM, more members of ODM or Wiper elected to conduct the oversight role. So that is one of the failures of this particular constitution in terms of the presidency not being given an oversight role. The second way we are able to do that is if Kenyans chose to have a purely parliamentary system of government. What would that mean? It will simply mean that the head of the political party that has the most number, for example, if it's UDA, then becomes prime minister. However, the other coalitions, ODM, UGM, Wiper, could then coalesce and form the shadow government. What we'll then do is, in terms of creating a check and a balance, you'd then avoid this kind of cohabitation, like they call it, this bad marriage, which we do not even know whether it is legal in court, it's legal in church, or it's legal in a funeral. That you need to then to have a constitutional construct that would make sure, if you're the parliamentary system, all these coalitions that you see moving around town trying to shout and cry would then be moving towards checking the presidency. So it is true what Bonnie says, that yes, we have these institutions, but those institutions are exclusive. And the best way to do that is to then look at the constitutional construct in terms of what do you want to achieve. Do you want to achieve a presidential system of government? Yes. Then you have to structure the elections differently. Do you want to achieve a parliamentary system of government? Yes. Then we create those provisions in terms of helping our institutions work for us. I hope I make sense, Obed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nato. That makes a lot of sense. Unfortunately, we had lost Bonnie, and not to lose what he was stating earlier on, I'll allow him his final remarks before we can open up to the plenary.
Awesome.
Bonnie,
Can you hear me?
proceed.
Thank you. So I just wanted to make one final comment. To me, I'm not sitting here claiming to be a constitutional lawyer, but the point of a constitution is what? Is to guarantee the rule of law, in my view, and safeguard the rights of citizens. And if that's the case, we have to ask ourselves whether or not we are actually seeing this happen in our country. I don't think that most people can sit here and tell me that the system that we are, as we are seeing things unfold in our country, that we have a system where the rule of law prevails. I don't feel that. I look at our institutions like the parliament, for example. You're hearing people getting bribed to vote certain ways in parliament. Again, we talk about, for example, the fact that parliament is supposed to review the government's spending, right? It's supposed to approve the budget. It's supposed to, for example, not. It's supposed to make sure that the government does not raise the debt. You don't raise the debt ceiling recklessly, right? But none of that stuff is happening. So I don't think that our system of government is working the way it's supposed to be, or at least the way that we want it to be. And I go back to my point of having a constitution is one thing, but having the system function the way it's supposed to be, that's a totally different thing. It comes down to the people that are in those positions. The final thing I want to make is this. Our system, and I'm looking at this from an economic standpoint, our system of government is designed is not sustainable, because you can want a system, you can want representation to make sure that everybody in the country feels represented deep down to who they are. If we're talking about tribe, we're talking about sexual orientation, we are talking about whether someone is disabled or not. At the end of the day, you have to make it work from an economic standpoint. We are spending so much money to make sure that this system continues. It is not sustainable. I want to make sure that every Kenyan understands this. I just told you that every year we are adding 1 trillion shillings in debt to our balance sheet to continue this system. Our system of government is eating up virtually all the money that we have right now. So again, if you're paying 60% of your interest, of your income in interest, and then you have 40% left, and then we have 290 members of parliament, we have 47 senators, we have 47 governors, 47 women reps. Every one of these people have very high salaries, high allowances. We cannot sustain this system. It does not make any sense. It is so big. It is not reasonable to have this kind of many representatives representing us. It is not sustainable. So you need to understand that this is not sustainable, and that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie. You're looking at sustainability, and this is from the economic aspect of the conversation and the constitution at large. And therefore, just a heads up, ladies and gentlemen, into the second hour, we'll be looking at now the representation aspect of this constitution. We'll be looking at what most of you love to talk about, that is the unending corruption. But let's not forget there's brutality and injustice that has been committed over the history of our country. So, how far are we doing with that? In the meantime, this is Mizani 254. We are discussing rebirth of a nation. 14 years into the constitution, do we feel that it has addressed the major issues this document, which is a living document, had aspired to address? With us, we have Neto Agostino, who is not only a co-leader of United Green Movement Party, which he refused to answer if he's really the green environmentalist or is green the color. We'll find out once we have the opportunity. And we also have Bonnie Mwangi. Bonnie Mwangi is an economist and a certified public accountant who has been, over the past few weeks and months, unleashing a number of research, but I would call them auditing and public auditing of our accounts and how your monies are being spent, and to some extent has caused a lot of concern among the populace. This conversation continues right here on Mizani 254. You can join us into the chat section, request the mic, and Obes, let's now go to the plenary. I don't know what you have on your end, if we have any, before we start with Anthony.
I'll read a few comments. I think there's a question that was given by Mstaka Baliwa Taifa. Why has the COK seemed to breed corruption and not curtail it? So probably a question to be answered by the speakers. And then Stella says, as much as the COK is not adhered to, I appreciate having it. It gives us a reference point, and that way we know that it's the people we've elected or been electing that are failing us. Then I have John Seremani, who says, my main gripe with the COK 2010 as it currently is the lackluster expression of the constitutional principle of localism. Police should be taken out of the reach of the executive completely and absolutely localized. Only IPOA should be national. So he says he has a book that he's writing, and there's a chapter 12, part of the Linda Katiba thing is on chapter 12 of his book, and he's put a link there. So probably when you have time, check that. Anthony, I'm going to allow you to speak, and I give you 3 minutes to make a contribution. Then we have the Villager 254, as we allow more to come to the speaker so that they can make their contribution. Anthony?
Thank you, Midani. Thank you, Obet. Thank you, Eli, and everyone who's tuned in. Now, when you look at the Constitution, as it was written in 2010, it did something remarkable for this country. It organized the entire republic. It told the politicians, when you organized yourself into political parties, these are your duties, this is how you function. And it gave them the spectrum to which they should function in, CDF and everything. It later on told the executive, these are the functions of the executives. When you organize yourselves, this is how you will function. And it gave him the spectrum and the parameters to work with. And all the other arms of government, the judiciary and everything else. Ultimately, the wonderful part of this constitution, it then told the Kenyan citizens, if you do not like how these arms of government are working for you, it tells them, if you organize yourselves, and that's why that quote, the guy comes, the people may. If you citizens organize yourselves, because the constitution organized everyone else, it organized government, and then tells the people, if you people feel you are not being governed well, organize yourself. It tells the people either how to remove that government of the day, would be realizing as the citizens of Kenya today is the only thing we need to do is organize ourselves. The same day this republic shuts down for a day to go to the ballot, the day Kenyans wake up and say, you know what? We've had it. We want to recall everyone. It has stipulated 1 million signatures, verifiable, take them to the IEBC, and you can now terminate government and go into a new election. So that's where we find ourselves today. We are caught between, if we feel that this government is so bad, or any other government for that day, all we need to do as citizens is organize ourselves, pick a day, because when people did the 25th was a public holiday, it showed that Kenyans can pick a day and say, we've had enough of this particular thing. We've had enough. We are making today our public holiday, and we are recalling or repealing or rewriting something. That is the one thing I came to realize with this constitution this year. It's all a matter of how well can we, the citizens, organize ourselves. And that's where the government, the other arms of government benefit, because they know there's no day we shall have the resolve collectively as a country to come together and say, we've had enough of this and we are taking action within the constitution to undo it, to amend it, or to improve it. Thank you, Robert.
That's good, Anthony. Thank you. The Villager 254. There are so many things that are going on currently. We talk about a very progressive constitution, but then you also realize that we have issues to do with us actualizing what's in the constitution. And one of those things, if I may say, look at Article 37 of the constitution, one that we really love to talk about. But Kenyans have not been able to enjoy it as much. Is there something that needs to be done to make it better? Or the other things, for instance, when Kenyans are oversighting the government doesn't seem to be understanding where Kenyans are coming from. Is it the political class that does not understand the constitution, or Kenyans have interpreted it wrongly? The Villager.
Thank you so much, sir, for this opportunity. This is the Villager Patrick here. Yes, true. We have a very beautiful constitution. I agree with everyone who has talked, and everyone agrees that Kenya has the best constitution. But even with that beautiful constitution, I remember some time ago, lawyer Orengo, when he was talking about the constitution of Kenya, he was talking about the spirit of the constitution. And that's what we are lacking currently. Yes, we have a very beautiful constitution. And when I look at the ruling class and the people of Kenya, the rights we have under the constitution, and also the privileges that the ruling class have as they exercise the leadership and the constitution on our behalf. The problem is, you can see good example is what happened after June 25th. Personally, with my children and my friends, I gathered most of my friends. We went to the streets and we were really tear gassed. And I experienced firsthand a policeman shooting at us directly.
Eli, I can hear the Villager.
We seem to have lost the Villager. We lost him at the point of shooting.
Oh, sorry. My screen went off. I think when the screen goes off, it goes off.
That's the problem of people with iPhones. Proceed.
Thank you. So I experienced the firsthand when police are clearly violating my rights as a Kenyan to picket, to demonstrate, and to air my opinion. I was not violent. And I can assure you, for the first time I experienced how the police turns the masses against them so that they can, in other words, they provoke them to become violent. Because on that day, when they shot at us 3 times, the vehicle was running from Expressway heading to Integrity Center, then back again, and they were always shooting at us. On the 5th time when he was doing that round, the young people pulled the fence of All Saints, they removed stones, and they blocked the road. They didn't block the road for other vehicles to pass because until then, buses were passing, personal cars were passing, taxis were passing. They blocked the road to make sure that they are safe from the shooting policeman who was riding a Land Cruiser. They were always on that Land Cruiser shooting at us and throwing canisters even inside the church. I saw them provoke us to block the road to protect ourselves. And during that period is when, as they were doing it, some young people, I was there, they decided, let's pass through Uhuru Park and we go to parliament directly. I saw it. They provoked these people to the core. So, in short, the constitution is very good, but the people we have put there to oversee this constitution, they don't respect it. Why? We talk about independent bodies. And there's one independent body that I always look at that is not functioning well, very well. But I'll talk. You said we'll talk about that later. But when you look at the police being an independent force, yet they are being manipulated by the ruling class, what does that tell you? It is because the constitution is good, but the people we have put in power, they are abusing the right of the constitution. So you ask me, is it that the Kenyans don't understand their rights? We do understand our rights. But remember, the politicians are so good in playing with our minds. As you can see what has happened right now, they have quieted portions and pockets of the Kenyan population, such that the people who are with us, and even it is evident here on this platform, they have now moved to be with the government. Personally, I was on the side of the government for the longest. But when I reviewed, especially the report of the Office of the Auditor General, I realized that I don't have a government. And all that I have are people I've been supporting by their lives and they don't care about my country. Therefore, it is the masses, the ruling class, the few of them who are making the Constitution of Kenya 2010 not work. They have interfered with every office in this country. And yes, a time is coming. And what we are doing currently is to make sure that the population, the people of Kenya knows what is happening with the government, number one. And number two, we are telling them they are powerful and they have a way to be able to take that mandate that my colleagues here have talked about and make sure that the government serves them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, the villager. And that's such a bad experience from your own government when they shoot at you until you start asking, am I a criminal for demanding what is right and justice? We are having the rebirth of a conversation, rather, rebirth of a nation conversation on the Constitution 14 years later, which will be coming to life on the 27th of August 2024. What are our gains? What are our gaps? And why is this the case? How should we move forward? Some of the issues we are looking at. Bonnie here wants to tell us a goodbye before he can log off, but I will not allow him to go without addressing the very pertinent issues that surround the expenditures and the misuse of our public funds from his work. Bonnie, the mic is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
You are clear. Proceed.
Awesome. So again, I want to thank you guys for this opportunity to address a serious issue that we are, it's a serious discourse in our country in terms of whether the constitution is working, where we're headed. I wanted to make this point as a sign off, which is we are sitting here talking about how beautiful the constitution is, how good it is relative to other countries. But I want to make the same point that I tried to make before, which is a document means nothing if people do not feel like the Constitution represents them and it protects them. And so I'm sure you guys have seen a lot of my reports, talking about or covering corruption at the counties, outright stealing of money, wastage. And so the point I try to tell people whenever they see these reports is that none of the information that I use in those reports is actually secret. 100% of the information contained in those reports is public information, and it's not hearsay. It's not allegations. You notice that you've never seen anybody come out to dispute any number that I've had in those reports because they are true, right? And so, what does it say about our constitution? What does it say about our country where people can go into public offices, plunder, steal, pillage, waste without anything happening to them? In our country today, you can go to a place like Turkana, steal billions of shillings from the poorest people in our country. Everybody knows that stealing happened. The auditor come and ask questions. There's no explanations, but we know these people have went and bought properties, and then nothing happens to them. They get appointed to government positions. You and I are talking right now. I covered the county of Turkana. The previous governor of that county today works at State House. You and I are paying him. Okay. A few weeks ago, you saw the former governor of Makerimo, the county, but Oparanya, the EACC told the president, do not touch him with a 10-foot pole. He's a criminal. We're investigating him. That didn't mean anything. Today, he's working for the government. You and I are paying him. And so I cover all this corruption and all these things that are happening in these counties. And I sit here and I get depressed because it's criminality. You can see it, right? You can see it, and nothing is happening to these people. So, what is the point of having a constitution? What is the point of celebrating a document that means nothing? It means absolutely nothing if I go and I see the poorest people in a particular country like Kilifi cannot afford food, cannot afford education, cannot go to a hospital and get treated. The people that are leading those counties steal money, much of that money doesn't go anywhere. It stays in our country and nothing happens to them. We really need to ask the question of what is the point of having a country. We should not be celebrating the Constitution. It means nothing to 99% of the people. And it's sad that I'm saying that, but I think a lot of people feel the same way. Thank you so much again, and have a nice day.
Thank you, Bonnie. And it's unfortunate, but you had told us you'll not be able to stay through the conversation. We do appreciate you making time. As you walk out of this space, we want to wish you the very best in your endeavors. You are doing the Lord's work, I must say, and that Lord's work includes defending the constitution that you are saying has been butchered by many of those who are in political powers and the political elite. Want to go to the next set of speakers and kindly allow us to give you 3 minutes each because we really want to exhaust from our main speakers what they had to deliver this morning. So don't feel like we are pressing you not to give enough of your content. Let's go straight to Lamek. Lamek, good morning to you. 3 minutes.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Hope you're getting me.
You loud and clear, proceed.
Okay, me as thank you, Elikuyan, for giving me this chance. And like me, I got you saying that since the constitution was promulgated by Mike Kibaki in 2010, so me, I want to go straight to the points. Like I have 3 points to put across, which are the main in the constitution of Kenya. So, according to the Constitution of Kenya is supreme. It is supreme, and anything that is done, it should be backward to this constitution. So, like, according the hierarchy of power, starting from the president to the gubernatorial seat up to the MCS, I see that's an achievement. It's working on well because we we Kenyan citizens we are we are taking part in voting this the president and all the leaders. Yeah. So according to the rule of law, since the laws are contained in this constitution of Kenya, I see them they aren't working. So meaning the rule of law is not achieved in this Kenyan constitution. Uh, Moving to the arms of the government, which are the judiciary, executive, and legislature, judiciary is the measure, and judiciary should be independent. But according to this reign, I can see that judiciary is being ruled by someone which is not applicable to the constitution of Kenya. So like some laws like demonstrations and picketing, it's in accordance to the Kenyan constitution, but it is being violated. So like me, I'm talking of these facts. Like we should. I don't know these spaces we do hold here, like what should we do to cap uh, these achievements that are not achieved? What should we do to cap these? Okay, thank you for your time, and I wish you a good day.
Thank you, Lamek. We do appreciate you. The biggest question you're asking is what should we do? Dr. Nimrod, the mic is yours.
Good morning, guys. Thanks a lot for the time, Mizani, Obiedi, and the guys who are hosting the space. Thank you guys for giving us this chance. Mine has always been a simple. It's a simple sum up. The political class is not. It's not people who are foreigners to us. This is just Kenyans like us. And what they have perfected is the art of poverty, politics of poverty. And you look, I draw parallel with slavery. If you look at the time of slavery, that's the same thing they did. They kind of suppressed you to a state of poverty where you have to depend on them. And that's what has been being perpetuated since independence, because the colonizers, what they left us with is a system of governance which keeps us going round and round into discussion, but actually on the ground, what is being delivered. And then the people who were selected to lead us after independence were not nationalists, were not patriotic. These were people with vested interest. And it has actually carried on from independence to this day, where now it is been entrenched into our blood, into our system, and into the political class that you look at the way they even bring their families from when they finish, when they have offsprings, the way they bring them up, the way they take them to study, the way they start engaging them and instilling them into the system. By the time these guys they're out, they know they've got already roots, and this is what has always happened to a lot of African countries, where they end up being ruled by the same political class who have got vested interest, not national interest or patriotism in them. They've got vested interest. And this is why I need to ask Kenyans, they need to ask themselves, why are they poor? Are they poor because they cannot afford to kind of generate wealth for themselves? Are they poor? Are Kenya, is the country poor because we don't have human resource which is capable of producing? Or is the country not blessed with whatever it requires to be a wealthy nation? You see, when you start asking them deep questions, and then you realize the problem doesn't lie with the system, because we keep on talking about the constitution, the paperwork, and all that, and that's what they've kept us going in merry-go-round. You're talking about the system. We've been discussing about the system, the constitution, and people, but are we talking? Are we discussing about the actual problem which bites the country, which is feeding on the country? And that is politics of vested interest. And there's no patriotism with our political class, and even Kenyans ourselves. Let's not just point out a finger at one place. We need to start looking even individually within ourselves. What are you doing for your country? When you get an opportunity, what do you do for your country? Are you actually make it in a better place? You see, when we start asking ourselves them deep questions, we start understanding the actual concept of it's not about the constitution. Constitution is just a paper. It's just a document. The reality is us Kenyans. We need to start asking. There's a lot of things we can start doing and circumvent what the political class are trying to instill on us. And that requires us getting into communities and into national having this citizen assembly where people in within areas of their society where they exist, they figure out how to solve their problems without the help of the government, and eventually the government will lose that relevance. And that's the only way we can start. Because you look at it, the political class are perfected in. The other day, Ruto increased salary for the cops. Why do you think he increased the salary for the cops all of a sudden? When there's no JSS teachers, there's no medication in school, in hospitals, there's no enough doctors. There's a lot of things which the money could have been spent. But the first thing he did, what did he do? Because he knows that when he needs to stay in power, he just needs the boys out with bullets. And that's what has happened. So we need to have a sober discussion amongst ourselves as Kenyans. Let's not stop talking about this political class and the constitution. Is us Kenyans first. What does Kenya mean, being Kenyan? What do we want for our country? And we start organizing ourselves within our communities, within our environments. And the people who are within the government, they need to start leaking information of what actually the atrocities, which is being perpetuated by the political class. In that way, we'll start changing the narrative. And that's my
All right.
conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nimrod, raising quite pertinent issues on how we look at this constitution. And to that effect, I would like to invite back our main speaker, that is Nato Agostino, before we can have more contributions from the plenary. But I want to also look at some of your comments that are coming in thick and fast. I like something said and shared here by, who is this again? Sorry, I just have to go through the TL. We have Erickson Odhiambo. Erickson, thank you for joining. As always, a pleasure having you. You say there is no goodwill by the leadership in implementing the constitution in full. Ella Kimwele, who says the problem is not the representation, the problem is the grossly overpaid representatives and the corruption. Politics is the highest paying gig. That is the problem. We pay an MCA more than a doctor. And goes further to say, without a culture of constitutionalism, the COK 2010 will not amount to much. Gen Z used the COK to predict their demands, to make their demands, and the political class are scared and now wish to mutilate the COK 2010. We must guard it jealously. And Agustin, to that effect, I want to come back to you. You have had the privilege to serve in the National Assembly, and that is where laws are generated, debated, and eventually adopted. What would you say is the missing factor in ensuring the Constitution Kenya, that is 2010 Constitution, comes to its full life? Neto.
Look, I mean, Mizani, that's a very complex, compound question. But let me start first. You've twice asked me to explain what Green Kenyan Living his profiles of courage means. So one is I am the co-leader of a political party in Kenya called the United Green Movement Party. The United Green Movement Party is one of Kenya's 90 political parties, and we believe in ecocentrism. We have what drives our politics is a green ideology, that everything else that you want to do, construct, think through the economics is based on a green ideology. Having said that, what would make the Constitution of Kenya function? I think two speakers have spoken here and said, Kenya lacks constitutionalism. And Bonnie was very frustrated. He thinks that we do not need the Constitution because it looks like it does not work. The Constitution of Kenya is a good document. It's a good thing. It organizes power. There are a couple of things that stops people from realizing their rights. So now I speak from a rights angle. One of the things that we need to do, which we've done very well over the past 2 or 3 months, is civic awareness. For you to realize your right to health, the right to education, the right to development, first of all, you must be aware. You must be aware that that right exists and that you can make demands on that particular right. Someone said here, albeit not in a very, he said, that one of the things the Constitution of Kenya has given us right now is that Article 1, that sovereignty belongs to the people. The Kenyan people right now are sovereign. We've been given a chance to bring to task our people. We've also been given the chance to explore the aspirations of Article 37. So number one is civic awareness, that we must know what those rights look like, what those rights entail, and that those rights are in the Constitution. So that's the first part in helping us realize those rights. But the second thing is to make demands. I'd like to explain or expound what Article 37 really means. Article 37 means that if you see something that is wrong, you can petition. Petition is making a prayer. So I'll give you an example. If, for example, you come from Bungoma, you come from Homa Bay, or you come from Kwale, and Kwale level 4 hospital is not working, what Article 37 anticipates is, number one, you're civic aware, that you're aware of the rights, you have the knowledge. Now, Article 37 gives the right to go and make those demands to the person who is supposed to be giving that offer, either the governor or the county assembly. You make a specific prayer. So picketing is not just about, moving in the streets without a particular thing that you want tackled. So once we are civic aware, we make those particular petitions. You've seen, even with the presidency the last few days, even though he took back his word, when people made demands, we do not want the finance bill, we do not want this entire cabinet. If you make specific prayers, knowing that you can make those specific prayers, then you will be able to live the spirit of the constitution. That is number one. The second one is pushing institutions of government to function. The judiciary of Kenya is, I think, totally let down. It is, I see a few people thinking the judiciary is working. When you have cases taking forever in court to be decided, to be dispensed off with, especially corruption cases, especially cases that determine several things, Article 159 of the Constitution says that, justice delayed is justice denied. So you cannot have a judiciary that takes 7, 8, 10 years to determine a case on corruption, for example, and then have those same people recycled into office. They are the ones clawing back the rights. Because, for example, if certain cases of politicians had been decided in good time, you will then now have them, for example, being barred from office. But to the extent that, the cases are still lying there, it takes too long. So the institutions of government, being both the judiciary and parliament, are also the places where the implementation of the constitution or the realization of the aspirations of the constitution fail or go counter. The third issue why we're not able to realize the aspirations of the constitution is the issues of public debt. If you look at what the fund where we draw our monies from, it says that the first charge in the fund, the consolidated fund, is going to be paying off public debt. Why is that important? If you're going to look for a hospital, if you're going to look for a water point, or looking for education bursaries, we first of all put all the monies that Kenya gathers in taxes and donations into the consolidated fund. To the extent that we are paying a huge amount of that money to debt, some of which debt which is opaque, debt we do not know who borrowed, or debt that some Kenyans borrowed and just squandered. That then becomes a problem. But that particular debt is then a problem in two ways. That, number one, the institution of parliament has failed to check the debt ceiling, but also the institution of parliament has failed to check in terms of who borrows the debt and what the debt is used for. So we then therefore end up with not having enough money to realize the aspirations of what the constitution does. The fourth thing is international institutions. You've seen over the past few days, the IMF, the World Bank, giving conditionalities that are not Kenyan friendly. And to the extent that, for example, the Kenyan government is desperate for the aspirations of the Western powers, then they do things that are counter to the aspirations of the Kenyan people. So yes, we have a good constitutional document in terms of what needs to be done, but because the government then needs to kowtow to the wishes and aspirations of Western powers, IMF, the World Bank, and other citizens, then they end up doing things that are really, really harmful to the aspirations of the Kenyan people. What is the solution, in my view? Eternal vigilance. That the Kenyan people must exercise eternal vigilance, both in terms of the constitutional provisions, having been aware, civic aware. We know this is what our rights are, and anyone who wants to go counter those rights, eternal awareness. Let me tell you something. Power is afraid. And you asked me that, Mizani, power is afraid, and do not really think that power does not quiver. To the extent that the Kenyan people are able to stand up and ask and make demands, so long as you're making the correct demands, power is going to quiver, power is going to give in. So I really think that what we must do as a Kenyan people is eternal vigilance, and that will give us the realization and the aspiration of the Kenyan constitution. I thank you.
Thank you very much, NATO. And quite a number of issues you raised and responded to, but the questions continue streaming in. And I want to go to a question here by Anthony Omoro, who says, rather a comment, which says, we cannot properly evaluate the Katiba 2010 until we first have a president who fully obeys it. Then we can figure out what needs streamlining. It shouldn't be much, says Anthony. Betty, and I would love to have had you coming on board, Betty. Betty Okero, who says, we have this amazing document and we have refused to make it work. We need to focus on the problem and eat the people we put to speak on our behalf, to represent us, to protect us, to ensure we aren't just surviving, but living. So let us focus on that and start with ourselves. Interesting comments there, Betty. So she questions, can we start by asking why can we as a people get why can't we as a people get this right? Why are we sabotaging our own survival ourselves? Why is it that even when we have sovereign power, we are not able to weaponize it to work for us? And that's why everybody keeps saying there's a problem with the constitution, probably. I don't know if that's how you feel. Let us know what you think in the chat section. Retweet the space if you may. We are almost coming to the end of the conversation and would love to have as much as possible coming from all of you. Obed, I'll give you the cue and then we can invite more speakers from the plenary to make their comments. And Erickson and Diamonds, I'll give you priority. Obed, please.
I don't really have much to say, but the question I'd like to pose to us is we expect and are asking people to implement the constitution when we know too well that these people are among us the people who were anti the constitution. Remember, your current president was against the constitution 2010. He actually led the no campaign. So honestly, for him to honor and respect the constitution is probably a strange thing to tell him. But maybe he's obligated by virtue of his responsibility and position. And Schedule 3 is another interesting, the third schedule is interesting because he has to swear an oath, it's a requirement. But does he really believe in this constitution? I do not think so. I don't know what, Diamond, I think Diamond was supposed to come next. Diamond, what do you think and how do we try and cure this problem?
Obed and Misani, hi, how are you? I hope you can hear me.
Yes, 100%.
Okay. So, first of all, I think we have one big problem is our political class. I think that the swamp is too dirty. And if you look at what they're even currently doing, is they're coming together against the people. Those whom you expect to be in their position or you expected to be doing a bit more in terms of oversight are actually sitting with the same people who they were blaming to be mismanaging the country. So our biggest problem lies with our political class. And you see, they're in the political class because we've also donated power to them. So there are things they do within their power that we've given them that they actually mess up our country. So first of all, I think as citizens and having these active conversations, one of the biggest loopholes of our constitution today is the fact that we allow people or individuals who've been either mentioned in corruption cases, implicated, or even charged to still hold public office. And if you ask me, if you own a company today, if your finance manager, for example, has been implicated to have stolen money, would you continue having them in office? Or if you want to hire an individual to your company, assuming you own the company, would you hire anyone with questionable integrity? So somebody who's already been uh, charged in a court of law or is implicated in a scandal. So I think the first loophole we need to close as a country and as a people is we need to fix that law that allows people who've been either mentioned, who've been proven to have stolen or done anything wrong, or who do not meet the integrity standard. And the same should even block them from actually buying. You go clean your name and then come back. You go clean your name and then come back. The fact that we allow these people to keep coming back to power is they actually come back for more. And we lose so much money to corruption that we are actually unable to even offer basic services. We cannot offer health services. We cannot offer basic education services. It becomes complex to hire teachers. This CS will be saying that, another MP will be saying something else. It becomes very complex to offer health services to even the most basic and rural places in this country. So our biggest problem lies with one, the political class, two, our law around corruption. And I'm sure the constitution was clear, but what they've done is they went to court, they went to parliament, they changed one law after another, so that they completely remove the need for integrity to be a major milestone or to be a major thing when getting into public office. So I think, in fact, Mizani, I've seen you writing a lot of serious letters lately. I think the next letter we should be writing is we want to stop anyone who is implicated, even mentioned alone, should actually not hold public office. It is a conversation we should have. It is a conversation the citizens must call for. It is a conversation that we must really stand up for. And I'll tell you a lot of examples. You've all followed what has happened with many projects that they have launched. Morara has done a good job. However, you realize that the people who are actually implicated to have either paid a project that never started, some people have paid money for a project that should not have been paid, some people have taken money and stopped doing the projects. All these people are actually still holding public office. The same people that have been mentioned severally. Somebody was given a 1 billion tender through an email, a simple email. She doesn't even know who wrote the email, I think. Got a 1 billion tender. The CS who was in charge at that point in time is actually hired to be an economic advisor. It's painful, and the thing is, we need to stop it, and it must stop somewhere. Some of these wars we will fight them in the street, some of them will fight them in court, some of them will fight them with letters and every other thing. I think that's my view, Robert. We must stop people who have been mentioned, implicated, or any other thing. If your name has been mentioned in a corruption case, until when you clear that name, you should not actually hold public office. It beats logic. Okay.
Diamond, we get the frustration, but also the question you ask is, we as a people, do we honestly want to hold politicians to that level of integrity when we probably don't have it?
The thing is, uh, we actually have, because let me tell you, if you work in the private sector, for example, or outside government, and these are the same Kenyans. A Kenyan who works in the private sector is a Kenyan like the one in the public sector. The thing is, when they get into the public sector, because of all these loopholes that have been set up either through systematically in the constitution or by malicious leaders, because of those loopholes, these Kenyans have accepted to do that. So it is a system issue. It's not about people. It's not about people because we have private sector. You think if you work in a multinational today and you are implicated to have stolen 10 million, you will still be in office. Also, remember there is a very big thing called civic education. This thing, it is not a easy thing, but it must be done. It comes with a cost. Many people out, especially in the villages and in the rurals, do not even understand these things we are speaking about. If this space was broadcasted today on a radio station, many people would change the station. Hawataki hiyo maneno. It's too much work, too much. It's complex, and they don't want to have that conversation. So, Obed, I would answer you that it is not about we the people. It is not us. It's the political class that is messing up. Because the same Kenyans we are talking to today, some of them are working either for multinationals, for NGOs, for every other thing, where rules are actually followed to the latter. So it's not about us. It's about the political class.
Thank you so much, Diamond. That's quite clear. I see Betty's hand is up. Betty, I'd like to hear what you have, and welcome to the conversation because I heard you talk somewhere else, and I'd like to hear what are your sentiments and what exactly should we do? Because in Kenya, we probably talk too much and complain a lot, but really do not go out of our way to ensure that we make changes that we're looking at. I don't know what's your contribution, but I'd like you to address that as you give your contribution as well.
Thank you so much, and everybody who is on this platform today. Good morning, and I hope you're all well. I think I want to start with just trying to put a position. There are people who depend on the system, given their poverty status, and they depend on them. And these are the people who will be the first one to attack you, but they're always the first people who are there to defend the same system that we're talking about. I always find it interesting how we have amazing trust in those people we have entrusted with leadership, but fail us repeatedly. And we have a trust deficit for people, Kenyans, who are struggling like everybody else, to be able to see how to organize when they're educating. We ask interesting questions about integrity from fellow Kenyans, but we're not able to do the same with the leaders, despite that they show us every single day their true colors. The system of government that we have in terms of its leaders do not want the system that they have been created to be interfered with. So many people are enjoying ill-gotten money and they will protect themselves. And if you're in doubt, all you have to remember, is that at the peak of the Gen Z protests, we saw the system coalesce, got together, and became one. And we must recognize that, therefore, that power is very, very big, large, and extremely wealthy. I put on the platform, can anybody explain to me why somebody who declares a wealth of billions or 600 million or 500 million wants to get a job that is giving them, what, $1 million? I mean, if your business has got that much, then the assumption is that you're running an empire with employees, with staff, with everything. You have to make decisions. You literally have no time to be able to do something else. And yet we go for these jobs. From being a CEO to being comfortable calling yourself a CS. We need to ask questions. Why? And it goes back to the whole issue where you start asking yourself, so where did the billions we're talking about and we are now declaring come from, that we need to be able to be in a position perhaps to protect them? The second thing is to recognize that this same system identifies the people that they want to put in positions of power. Neto is here, and so you know what I'm talking about. So that even when you're running for a political seat, the whole issue around nomination being botched or not being fair, that is not a chance. It is deliberate, because you must be able to get the people who are like you and who will protect and defend and speak on your behalf when the time comes. And so sometimes even we as citizens have got to recognize that and be able to act accordingly in terms of rejecting when we see processes of this nature, taking place. Now, remember, you come in as leaders, political leaders, and then we start filling the independent or state offices. And because the system has coalesced, the system continues to coalesce around these institutions. In other words, none of the structures that we have in place will work for us because they're already rigged from the beginning. And it is for that reason that Kenyans have got to start asking themselves where we want to be able to place our trust and our faith and our belief. Because we go around and talk about how this constitution is wonderful, and then we have Bonnie and Morara telling us everything about how we have people who have just decided not to work, but we have to revert back and understand how the system was put in place and how the system was structured to make sure that it doesn't happen. But that alongside that, the system has also identified from citizens those who will defend and protect and become violent even against fellow citizens who are demanding for things to be done properly. So When we are unable to seek solace in our leadership, we then have to ask ourselves where we'll get our solace from. And our solace must be in all the other people who are in the same boat with us. And we know them. There are more than 10 million. So we need to organize. But I recognize also that there is need for a lot more civic education, not just about the document, but to get people to start connecting the dots in a way that they realize that choices have consequences. Our choices every 5 years has consequences. And I think at some point, citizens also have lost hope in themselves in having the ability to be able to transform this government and make this constitution work for us. So we have got to start doing the heavy lifting, but at community level. And I can tell you, immediately communities start organizing, start coordinating, the system will coalesce once more and we will see them in terms of the policy, in terms of the action, in terms of the division that is being created. But we need to prepare communities to understand that that is what they're going to get. So when it happens, it doesn't shock them. They actually prepare beforehand, knowing that that is the response they're going to take. So we need a lot of work, but we have to start by just figuring out how do we start building trust in we, the people, to recognize that they have sovereign power, to recognize that this constitution, they gave it to themselves, and that that supremacy is so important for them to be able to start acting in their interests, because we don't. And to be selfish about that interest, it's important. The idea that we must be forgiving, which we have been, forgive your fellow citizens. But when you put somebody in a position to power and the person continues to fail you, you have a duty and an obligation to not just reject the person, but to make sure that we hold them accountable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Betty. And it's actually a pleasure having you coming on board. I believe you're the only lady who has spoken on the space since we started off. I don't know what is happening to the lady speakers. Betty, can you send an emissary on our behalf and ask them to show up? Because we need to hear more voices from the ladies. Betty, is that something you can do?
Yes, but I also think that, so this is me. The conversation that we women like to have is one that links our every single day struggles, and to talk about those struggles without having a, what is it, not just intellectual, but a legally sort of conversation. That's one. Second, it's the language. If we want to have more ladies on board, perhaps we have to recognize the need for us to go indigenous and use our mother tongues to be able to have conversations with them in a way that they understand that if we're talking about land succession, what does that mean in relation to their survival? If we're able to bring that conversation down to a level where we're talking about every single day struggles, then we're home and dry. And I think that's important. Not many women are able to get onto spaces. We must be able to recognize that. We also have to recognize the time that we're choosing to be able to bring these conversations. I think we have to start investing in face-to-face conversation. That's something that a lot of women want, because we need to be able to see each other and talk and feel and laugh. And the space is good, but I think for this sort of conversation and the work that we want to put in, we're going to have to invest in a lot more face-to-face engagement. Thanks.
Thank you. I hope Obed is listening to that. Obed, you just want to change how you operate your programs. Again, thank you very much, Betty, for making time to be here. And those tips, they do help in addressing our approach to conversation. But we are looking at the Constitution at 14 years and the rebirth of a nation. What is the stride you've made, and what are the gaps, and how do we move forward as a country? As some of the questions you're raising, I'll have Erickson followed by Neto. You'll just have to be a bit patient. I think as the main speaker, at times you also want to know what people are saying. So be patient with us. We did not ignore you. So we'll have Erickson, and then we'll have DJ Nick, and then we can have NATO come in, and then we go back to the plenary. Erickson, go ahead.
Thank you so much. Good morning. So, thank you, Mizani, Eli, and everyone for joining this very, very important conversation. So, I'm speaking here as Secretary General of Third Way Alliance and a protege of Dr. Ekuro Kot, one of the people who was actually the CEO committee of experts who wrote this constitution. So spending a lot of time with him has made me have a lot of passion with this document. So first of all, we need to understand that the constitution is a social contract between the executive and the people. And the constitution is also a negotiated document. Okay. So if there's something I think we have missed out on for a long time, and we really need to go back and read the final report of the committee of experts, where they actually gave us a lot of leads and a lot of caution on what it meant having this beautiful document. It's a beautiful document, but they also mentioned things like it will be very expensive for some of the constitutional offices that the people of Kenya wanted, and we've come to see that because we have a lot of constitutional offices that we have to pay because we gave them to ourselves. Also, if you look at the basic structure of this constitution, it's about the document is about honoring who we are as a people. So, respect for the constitution, fidelity to the constitution is not being observed. And we have seen in recent past the executive being the most notorious in defying court orders. The Uhuru administration was the most notorious in defying court orders, and we as Thirdway really went to court a lot of times to just try and undo the the bad things that we're doing to this constitution, trying to massacre it. So also, if you look at just us as a people, I think many of you have talked about it, and it relates to the constitution because we have 18 chapters of this constitution, 216 articles. Being said that we're a Christian nation, I think we really need to go back and look at our social fabric and ethos because, and
Erickson, are you still with us? I seem to have lost you. Can anyone hear Erickson?
I can't.
No, I can't hear him.
I can't hear him.
Quite unfortunate, Erickson. You were just about to touch on the nerves of this talk. If you can hear us kindly, Erickson.
I think
All
we have
right.
DJ Nick then, as he set himself up. Come
Yes,
back.
we will come back to you, Erickson, after that. And Obeds, I want us to bring in DJ Nick and every other person that is tuned in. Be patient with us. Everybody's voice does matter, and we'd love to have as much as contribution from all of you. Nick here is going to tell some interesting stuff, especially when you talk about corruption and how it is institutionalized to the extent that those who practice corruption always get away with it. If it was one of those Shonda's, series will say how to get away with murder, but probably this is not what we are getting away with. But maybe it's what we are doing as a country. DJ Nick, the mic is yours. Proceed.
Hello, good morning. Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me. My name is
Yes, we can
Nick.
proceed.
Yeah, my name is Nick. I'm a DJ. I'm a sound enthusiast. I love everything sound, and I've been working in a major media house in Kenya, and talking about the constitution and matters corruption. Um, I think when we talk about corruption in Kenya, most times we look at the political space and ignore the corporate and commercial space. And I think corruption thrives even worse in the corporate arena, in the sense that, for instance, I'll speak about maybe in a case like Mumias Sugar Company, where just before Mumias went completely under the leadership of Kidero, Evans Kidero, formerly, and these are matters that are on the public space, and it is well-known factor that there was corruption in Mumias, where you find that these CEOs begin very many projects. For instance, Mumias began producing ethanol. Mumias began producing its own electricity. Mumias began producing the after waste for sale. Mumias began producing water. Mumias began producing the brown sugar, like they made it multiple, the white sugar, the brown sugar. And if you see, all of these are begun as projects where Chinese come in to establish a facility to begin something. So you find that the CEO begins a lot of those projects just to get kickback. Um, and the funny thing is that they all get away with it. I haven't seen a case from EACC where a corporate CEO or a corporate finance director gets charged for corruption in the corporate arena. I want to speak about the Standard Group. I know a lot of you have seen the news where just in the recent past they declared like 400 staff redundant. They released a notice, and the following day they sent all the 400 staff that are redundant on compulsory leave. Now, the Standard has been struggling to pay salaries. And this is majorly because they claim that they have a lot of debt. And so whatever revenue it is that they are collecting or they are generating first goes into clearing debt instead of doing things like paying salaries. So you find that where this began is immediately after COVID, where the CEO began a project. They called it, I think, Project Ego, where it was supposed to have uh, like all the staff can be able to work on multiple platforms. Like you can write for the paper, you can be on radio, you can be on TV. It's supposed to be collective, like how the staff work. But instead of investing in human resource, because if you're having, for instance, a 24/7 news channel, you're supposed to have bureaus, for instance, in the counties, where if anything is breaking news right now, it goes on air immediately, whether it is in the middle of the night or whether it is during daytime. So you find that if you're supposed to do the contingency plan where eh, someone can work on multiple platforms, you are supposed to invest in human resource. You're supposed to invest in talent that is going to do that job. But instead, the CEO, what did he do? Project Ego was about breaking the studios that were there then and doing a sort of open plan office so that news can be able to be disseminated from anywhere in the building. But they totally did a project with the Chinese and invested in a building, invested in computers, and no people to work in that building and no people to operate those computers. So you find that the CEO I can't profess to be an accountant or to be well in matters finances, but I can at least understand this from a layman perspective. What this project does is, like, the CEO gets kickback from the project, and now he doesn't remit salaries. He doesn't remit what he's deducting from the salaries to SACCO. He doesn't remit that to the pension scheme. You find that uh, the Standard Group hasn't remitted pension since 2019 till today. And they are deducting the same pension from the salaries. They haven't paid salaries from as far as February this year. Still, they are owing some stuff like 3 months of salary arrears from last year. If you add that to February of this year, that is like 8 months of salary arrears. And these guys, they tell you to go on compulsory leave. They tell you you're redundant. They don't care how you're going to live. They don't care what happens to you. They don't remit nothing. They chuck you from the mail system. There's no communication whatsoever. But this is dating back to the corruption where that project, instead of investing in human resource, it invested in an empty building and computers with no one to work on them. So I feel like when we talk about corruption, we should also speak about what happens in the corporate arena and how it is that we can have these CEOs and finance who see what on corruption in the corporate space also get and take responsibility for what they do and what they commit. Eli.
Thank you very much, Nick. I wouldn't say that's a very happy story with a happy ending, but I think it's the beginning of a new phase on how we approach matters, corporate governance, and corruption as a whole. NATO, you have listened to Nick and other speakers, and the issue of corruption is now what we're dealing with on this next phase of our conversation. I would like to hear your comments on that before I introduce other speakers to the channel. NATO.
Eli, just before you go on, sorry, I forgot about this completely. And then there's something I noticed. In the recent past, I've seen like 3 circles claiming that they do not have money, yet members have been contributing every month. I saw some other circle claiming they lost 18 billion. Myself, personally, after I got redundant, I wanted to get out from the circle. I'm being told the Standard Group hasn't remitted my circle deductions since 2019. So I can't chuck from the circle. I can't get my money. In the recent past, I've seen like 3 circles. Just last week, TSC were complaining they are being deducted. The money is not in the circles. What is happening? I don't think these cases are isolated, because it can't be that all of a sudden all circles don't have money for the members when the members need the money, yet the members have been diligently paying their dues every month and remitting their dues every month and getting deducted. These cases are not isolated. Something is happening and someone needs to check what is happening in the circle spaces. Thank you.
Well, talk of public finance management, among other issues, institutionalized corruption, and Kenyans who are paying so many taxes, including their own contributions to secure their future, go there and receive a shock of their life that we have no money for you. And guess what? It's just 18 billion plus. We will discuss about it. NATO, what do you say?
Thank you very much, Obed. So first of all, let me come in with a message of hope that it is going to be well. Kenya is going to find its DNA. We will get our country back. So having said that, all is not lost. I mean, I've listened to many people speak, and yes, I agree that corruption in Kenya is institutionalized. Corruption in Kenya has been elevated to its own level of museum. There's Diamond who said that we need to fix the law on Chapter 6, which is a law that basically the part of the Constitution that talks about how not to be corrupt, how to run a meritocratic government, what is the conduct of state officers. But I also want to share with you an experience that, with the time I was a member of parliament, I happened to have accompanied one of my members of parliament, like we were doing at that time. He was in court charged with a variety of many things. But what surprised me is, his supporters actually stormed the court at the time and demanded for their thief back. They said, if you claim a member of parliament is a thief, tunataka mwizi wetu. And, that just helped speak to the psyche of what the Kenyan people are. And that's why I agree with the DJ who's spoken that, we need to work on our ethics as a country. And that is not just the political class, because you notice that Kenyans just went to the elections less than 2 years ago and voted all these characters in the House of Parliament. And none of these characters have voted themselves in. They were voted with the people of Kenya. So you can't vote these thieves inside the office and then come to cry wolf. I think it's not fair on our psyche as a people of Kenya. So yes, it is true that our institutions are not working for us. But I'm also sure, and I've traveled this country quite a bit, there are good men and women who actually deserve political office. There are good men and women who deserve to be elected to run the political construct of our country. But the people of Kenya deny them the chance to be in those offices. So as they continue to deny them, sometimes we politicians who've had the chance to be elected in office, say people need to cry until they feel the pinch of what what the people deserve. Look at what happened in Kenya a couple of weeks ago during the Gen Z protests. If you see parts of Kenya in the coast, Nyanza region, everyone else was protesting. They were protesting against the Ruto presidency. They were all up in arms. Look at what happened 2 weeks later. A couple of their friends are in government. And now Ruto is as white as snow. So then I asked some of my two governor friends yesterday were welcoming the president. Was it that easy? I mean, so if it's just about getting our members to the table, if it's our tribe we want on the table, if it's our villager we want on the table, then everything then is okay. That is not the country I think we need to work for. If Ruto is bad, let Ruto be bad all the way. If Ruto is good, let Ruto be good all the way. I mean, there needs to be parameters, and those parameters are set out in Article, in Chapter 6, Article 73 to Article 8 of the Constitution, states what kind of country we need to have. It's going to be meritocracy. It's going to be not cronism, not nepotistic, and the code of conduct that is already in that constitution, that should be the yardstick. So if Kenyans really want the country to work, and it's possible, I've had a chance to study governance, and I'm happy the DJ actually said it, that the corporates in the country are more corrupt, the civil society in Kenya is more corrupt, the government in Kenya is very corrupt. So we are dealing with a nation that is, you cannot, it's not the case of the kettle calling the pot black. We really need to agree as a nation that we must reconstruct our psyche. It is possible because the men and women in this country were also very organized. I have engaged with people who really know what needs to be done. So where are we having a problem? We have extractive institutions, and that I've said before several times. Our parliament is very corrupt. Our judiciary is very corrupt. Our executive is very corrupt. How do we get there? We really need to get men and women, people who believe in this country, people who have a bit of ethics, and there are many, by the way, and they're just shying off because of the way the country the way the country people have behaved. But we go back to the critical juncture that the Gen Zs created. We saw for the first time a country where people were, I like to use the words they used, tribeless, formless, partyless, making demands of an institution. People who've engaged in civic awareness and really know what needs to happen. So I really think that we've almost reached there. We're almost going to get there. So that's why I'm saying, I bring in a message of hope. It's Sunday, and this particular Sunday service, my preaching is that we've kicked down a few cans. We need to kick a few more down the road. Dawn is near. We're about to get there. We will get Kenya. We are very lucky, and I speak like a not very old politician, yet very old. One of the best things that has happened over the past few days after the Gen Z election is Raila Odinga, William Ruto, Mudavadi, name them. They are all moving towards one side. That gives the chance for national rebirth. And that is what we need to start celebrating from the Constitution moving forward in 2027. I mean, that on this 27th of August, we can already see that, we need to urge these people to move together so that they sit in one corner. That way we're able to shine the torch in terms of the Kenya we do not want because of the opaqueness, what Betty talked about. It's an opaque cronist space where they know who they want to have on board. And that is why, you tell the president to remove these guys. He does mystical chairs. He finds them, he tells you all these people are bad. They're not meritocrats. The next thing, they're all back in some form or the other because he knows what they need to do. But that's not bad because at least you've seen who they are and how they want to live. What do we need to do? We need to organize ourselves. Time is of essence. And I've seen someone ask there, that we can organize ourselves in a way that at least a few people get into government who start sorting out the problem. By the way, what we're experiencing in Kenya is not bad. It has been experienced before. And there's several countries, if you look at the stories of very many countries, where we are is a good moment because it gives us a chance for a painful national rebirth. So the Constitution is not just giving us a chance for rebirth. The Constitution was a good document. It shapes as what someone else called very well a social contract with the people, a social contract. But the Constitution shapes us in a way that we need to do things, and there are provisions in there. What we need to do is just to get the men and women who help us deliver the spirit of the Constitution in a manner that we leave the document as it is. We live in a country where the aspirations of the Constitution under Article 1, the aspirations under Article 37, the aspirations under various prominents of the Constitution are lived. And that is not very difficult to do. And it's possible, but let's not worry. It is going to be doable. There is time. What we need to do is to engage in this kind of spaces where people will then get to learn that leadership is possible in a way that we must organize ourselves to reject these cartels in power. Because, you know, when you find that everything else is now okay because a few of my kinsmen are on the table eating, then you wonder, and I've seen some people comment, there's still bad roads in various parts of the country. There's still no bursaries, by the way. Students do not have money, and that time is about to begin. That cannot be because a few people joined William Ruto's government. That cannot be because William Ruto. It is the extractive nature of our institutions that we must make demands for. And maybe we can have a chance to sort it out in 2027 if men and women in Kenya agree that for once and for all we slay this dragon of corruption. You know, when Kibaki came into power, and those of you who are old enough in 2002, so that Kenyans went to the streets to even arrest police who were picking up 50 shillings bribes. People stood up for what was right in the country until Kibaki came down on his promise against corruption. So it is possible to slay the dragon of corruption by having this one man or woman in office who believes in constitutionalism, who believes in the spirit of the Constitution. And if you get that one man or one woman into office as the presidency or whatever it is, then Kenya will fall in place. We will then have that light and we can then reconstruct the country in the way we place. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Neto. I think what I know, and I'd have the real Joe speak about this. Politicians are very good friends. That's for sure. And listening to Lee Njiru the other day, he did mention something that is very fundamental, that politicians lie. And once you get into politics, you learn to lie. You learn to speak what people want to hear. So the real Joe, I saw a country, I'm not so sure which country is that, but they are trying to legislate on an issue to do with if you lie and you get into office, then they're trying to criminalize lying amongst the politicians. Do you think this is the way for us Kenyans to go, or we should change our moral values? The real Joe.
Thank you, Obeds. First of all, you're putting me to task to explain about politicians. It's okay. So just like you've said, the political system is one of the biggest effects we have as a country. And I'll also look into what the country you're talking about, that the country you're saying they're trying to criminalize lying. That would be a very good place to hit our politicians. But maybe just to make my comments on the topic, the Constitution at 14. Okay, thank you. Just to make my comments on the Constitution at 14, so that maybe later on that would derive the issue of politicians as well. So for me, I have two issues, because I feel we are talking about the Constitution as at 14, making it look it is mature or something like that. I have two issues and two fundamental questions, and I'll address them. Number one, was the Constitution born prematurely? Because I feel the Constitution is in incubation. So was the Constitution born prematurely, or was the Constitution just born, but the conditions that it found after birth still make it be in incubation? So the first thing, was the Constitution born prematurely? I feel the Constitution was not born prematurely, because if you look at the history of our country from 1963 and all the changes that we've been having, all the constitution reforms that we've been trying to have as a country, all the way down even to the Bomas draft, all the way leading up to the build up to the 2010 constitution, you find that the time for this constitution had come. Okay? And therefore, I feel it was not born prematurely. Then, does it mean then the conditions that we are subjecting the constitution to are the ones that are making it still be in incubation because it is 14 years, it has been 14 years in incubation. And therefore, this is where I settle. I feel we have not given the Constitution the correct conditions for it to grow up, mature, and just let's and Kenyans see the beauty of it. Why do I say this? The fundamental concept of our 2010 Constitution was not the Constitution for me, and I always say this all the time. The 2010 Constitution for me raised the bar so high, considering where we had come from. And therefore, whenever I try to understand the Constitution and I try to read it, I don't read it on the basis of Article 37 tells me to go to peaceably assemble and do this. No, I read Article 37. Yes, it gives me that right. But why should I even exercise that right in the first place? Why? That drives me to the principles that this Constitution was written on, the principles and values. So everything we talk about matters public finance. If I look at public finance, Article 201 talks about principles of public finance. And if you look at if you read those principles, you find that this is where we get wrong, because it talks about there shall be openness and accountability, and public, including public participation in financial matters. Does the public feel that there is public participation? Do Kenyans feel openness and accountability? They don't. That means we are getting it wrong from the principles. Okay? They don't feel the accountability. They don't feel the openness. Therefore, that public finance has failed entirely. If you fail on the principles, then you don't know what you're supposed to do. Okay? If you look at everything that the Constitution talks about, we always fail on the principles. And therefore, one thing that drives me so much is, if you look at our preamble, because I take the Constitution as a supreme being that is supposed to guide our country. Okay? Just like the way you would read the Bible. Okay? If you look at our preamble, we the people of Kenya, and just one paragraph summarizes everything we are talking about. We the people of Kenya, recognizing the aspirations of all Kenyans for a government based on essential values of human rights, equality, freedom, democracy, social justice, and the rule of law. I feel, for me, this paragraph summarizes everything, the aspiration of all Kenyans for this type of governance. Do we have this type of governance? No. Okay? So therefore, the conditions that we're subjecting our Constitution to cannot enable it to grow to the level that we can feel, yes, it is 14 years. It has been 14 years in incubation. We've not seen our Constitution try to talk, just like a baby when growing up. We've not seen our Constitution try to walk. Okay? But we want to start talking about amending it. Maybe, yes, those are discussions we can have, but we've not seen the Constitution walk. We are talking about the Constitution, this child having curved legs. Yes, the child has curved legs because this child needs vitamin D. The child needs to be subjected to natural sunlight. Are we able to? We have not subjected this child to natural sunlight. And therefore, the conditions we are giving this child are not favorable for this child to grow. And therefore, as I conclude, what conditions can we give? No, what should we now do? What should we now do? Okay? The number one is what we are currently doing on these spaces. We need to make people self-aware. We need to be aware of the problems that are happening to us. Okay? The previous generations were taught that it was very wrong to question authority. But in this generation, this new generation, we are seeing people coming outrightly to question authority. That is the thing. Okay? So these spaces, the forums that we're having, that is the first step. Making as many people as possible aware of what is going on. Because we need to understand, people need to know that they are in slavery. That's when you can save them. That is deriving the concept of Harriet Tubman. They need to be aware that they're slaves. Harriet Tubman said, if they only knew they were slaves, I would have saved 1,000 more. They need to know, first of all, what is happening to them. So these forums are very good for us, and we keep up with these forums. Number two, we are using the constitution to fight for it. And that's why some of us have been invoking Article 37. And this is, when we are invoking it, we are invoking it directly targeting those in authority, those in public service, because they are the ones who are failing us. It is not the people who are failing. No, it is those who are in public service who are failing us. And that's why sometimes we say, occupy this place, occupy this place, occupy this place. We are targeting them directly. And that is the second solution we need. We need to use the constitution to fight for itself. So therefore, when we are invoking Article 37, we are doing it to fight for this constitution that has given us that article. It sounds very ambiguous, but I don't know. Number three, and this is very important. Number three, it is time that we as young people take up the leadership positions. You cannot change. I've come to learn in the political arena, you cannot make changes when you are outside. You can only make changes when you are inside. So when we talk about a legislation that has failed, we need young people in those legislative assemblies so that they can make the changes, they can push for the changes that we want. So young people out here need to take up leadership positions. I encourage all of you who are thinking about that, take up leadership positions. That is the next way we'll use to change this. So as I conclude, I encourage all of us today, we should not tire. It is going to be a long journey. For those who always thought that it was going to be a win by just going to the street and protesting, no, it was not going to be achieved like that. That was just one of the ways. And that is still a way we will always use to push for our agenda. It is a long, bumpy ride. We need to use all the avenues available for us. So don't tire. Let us encourage each other and let us continue hosting these forums to educate each other. Thank you very much.
Thank you, the real Joe. That's real good talk. And you say that the constitution at 14 sounds like it's really grown, but it's a stunted child. And I think there's partially a point to that. So probably even before we consider making amendments on it or changes on it, we need to have it really live to its expectations, because I don't think we've implemented even a quarter of it. And that's what the problem is. I was considering, going down, closing the space, because we have about 25 minutes before we close. Big B or Big Bay? I don't know. Big B, if you can hear me. While he's trying to sort himself out, Marabu Stokes?
Am I coming through?
Yes.
So thank you for the time. Thank you for the opportunity. I think one thing we must realize is that the constitution is the grand norm. It's not just a law. It is the grand norm, and it is what we, the people of Kenya, have decided to bind ourselves to. And we cannot compare the constitution to the penal code or the law of tort or the law of contract, whereby you can seek redress from other entities when you are aggrieved. The constitution is a living document that cannot be allowed to be for anything to go repugnant to it. So I think, first of all, when we look at the constitution at 14, we must realize that we have had so many gains, especially in the side of affirmative action, where we have had women being put into position of leadership. And we can also look at, apart from the two-third gender rule, which we have not really actualized, we have also had some progress with the people with disability. We've dealt with human rights and so many other things. However, we must also realize that us as the people can no longer depend on the executive for them to adhere to the constitution. Because we look at the other day when Jimmy was arrested, and Martha Karua was raising something in court, and she said that the evidence that was adduced in court was unconstitutionally procured, because they did not have a search warrant from court to get Jimmy arrested. However, when you think of it, why is it that the police felt so compelled to bring this evidence to court? it is because the police have always gotten away with unconstitutional occurrences, and they felt that although they knew, because I'm sure the police know that taking evidence to court that was adduced, that was taken without constitutional means, is unconstitutional. But they decided that they're going to take this evidence because they know that the system, as it is corrupt, is going to allow them to provide this evidence in court and have Jimmy incarcerated. So we can no longer live like we are in a school situation whereby we are following the school rules and the students are following the school rules, when we have the headmasters and the teachers and the prefects who are not adhering to the school rules. They go out whenever they want, and the school rules are just meant for the students. And that is the Kenya we have had since Uhuru Kenyatta and now William Ruto. We are in a quagmire whereby the constitution is well drafted, and it is in order because it is 14 years now, and the constitution, many people understand it. However, we have an executive that decides that it will not comply with the constitution because it is allowed to get away with it. So I think it is about the citizenry, and I like it when the real Joe really quoted the preamble saying acknowledging, honoring, proud of, respectful, commitment, recognizing, exercising, adapt and enact and give ourselves this constitution and for the future generation. I think we should look at the preamble and realize that we have given ourselves this constitution, and it is up to us to protect the constitution from people, especially in the executive, who can feel like they want to downtrod the constitution because it does not augur to their whims. So thank you very much for the time. God bless.
All right, thank you very much, Marabu, and we do appreciate you coming on board this morning. Quite a number of issues raised, including the constitution and its supremacy. Have we been able to see this constitution live to its expectation? The real Joe has argued we haven't even had this child growing up. It's a started child, and we need to feed it with all the vitamins that exist to make sure that it comes to life. But of course, many of us, when we defend our rights, we go back to this constitution that tells you there is something in it. But questions are there being raised in terms of how we have looked at our constitution, including who are the people that have been given the charge to oversee the coming to life of this very important document in the lives of Kenyans and the prosperity of this nation. I want now to get closing remarks. We will start with you, Betty, and then we'll go to the real Joe, followed by NATO. Betty, I don't want to ask you any specific question, but I'll ask for your general comments. Proceed.
Thank you. So mine is really to say that Kenyans are finding their voice. And you can see that not just on this space, but you've seen that on the streets. You've seen that on posters. You've seen that in when they go to court. You've seen that, like, what somebody says when they're occupying spaces. That's Kenyans finding their voices, but they're also finding their power. We have started the steps. There is this there is a demand that things must change, and we all recognize that. I think what we need to do is to be able to see how we can come up with the different strategies to make it work, because Kenyans are not homogeneous. So we must be able to come up with different layered strategies that speak to each other in a way that whatever action is taking place in one part of the country may be different, but the overall objective and the goal remains the same. The second thing is to recognize that because Kenyans are starting to find their voices, the political class are also starting to get scared. And in response to that, they are now creating new laws that are trying to constrict our civic spaces or our civic engagement, or now trying to legalize every single thing that Kenyans are trying to do to try and restrict them from making the demands that they rightfully should do. And I think it's important for us to recognize that, because we are starting to flip the switch, but we're also saying that we need so many more people to be able to do that in a way that the political class is not able to control or manage. And that's why when we see that there is protest happening in only one area, it means we are also setting them to fail, so to speak. We need to be able to bring our voices together in a way that we defend and we protect those that are speaking, but we also start trying to create new spaces with new knowledge, with new understanding, with new demands and urgency from other people to be able to start aligning ourselves with what it is we're trying to demand now, that Kenya must work for ourselves. But then I think Kenyans need to put in a lot of the work, because it is now back, the burden and responsibility of changing and making this constitution work is going to be on us, because the people that we thought would have shown us time and time again that they're not interested in that. And we need that wake up call to recognize that perhaps our trust and faith in some of the people we are thinking are going to change is lost, but that we create alternative leadership and spaces within the community who can drive it. So what Bonnie is doing is amazing, because he's actually literally poking his finger in the eyes of the people who are stealing, but he's also allowing Kenyans to be able to see just how this rot that we're talking about has emerged, so that we can see how we can be able to address it. When Morara is going from one county to another, highlighting this rot, that's something that they're also, uncomfortable with. And we will start seeing the sort of response that will be given, where we'll start looking for some tax document that he didn't pay, anything small to try and shut us up. But when we are so many of us, so many Moraras and so many of Bonnies out on the streets, it will be difficult to shut people down because we are too many to control. But we will have to speak with one voice. We must make sure that our actions are coordinated or organized. And like, Nota says, we have hope. Not everything has not worked. There are things that have worked. We have seen institutions also working in defense of Kenyans and in defense of the Constitution. We must be able to cling on to that, knowing that there are people also out there who want to make sure that things change and that things work. And I just want to tell Kenyans that, hope is the most important thing to be able to have. Knowing that we have the will to be able to do that is also extremely important. We must be able to support each other. We must be able to commend the actions that people are doing. We must amplify the small things that people are doing so that they can recognize that we acknowledge what it is that they're doing and ask how it is that we can help them to continue in the campaigns that they have initiated. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Betty Okero. And Betty, we appreciate you making time to be here. I know you've been pushing a lot of conversations on just allowing Kenyans to see things from the civic space and championing for very many people who cannot voice their concerns. And to that, we give you your flowers and thank you for making time to be here. Real Joe, I will give you an opportunity to make your closing remarks, maybe 3 minutes if that works for you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ellie. So basically, on my closing remarks, I want to talk about what a future, what a good country, what the Kenya we want should look for us. We should look like. The Kenya we want is a country whereby we have leadership, not bosses. We want a Kenya where we see leadership and we see people take responsibility. For example, I saw during the vetting of the CSs, there's one nominee, Oparanya, who yesterday was having an homecoming. He was mentioned on corruption, and initially this was done. When initially this was done, he said this was political witch hunt, and when he was mentioned, then we saw the political class trying to downplay this, but he was already mentioned in that. What leadership means for me is if he is a true public servant and he feels it is political witch hunt, yes, he has been nominated. He should have done this. He should have told the president, I'm happy you've nominated me, but I have a case to answer. And I know I am innocent. Let me prove my innocence. Once I'm done with that case, I will come back to you and tell you, now you can give me the opportunity you wanted to give me. That is leadership. That is the kind of leadership we want. We want a leadership that takes responsibility. As a Kenya we want. So how are we going to achieve this leadership? How are we going to achieve this kind of leadership? The way we are going to achieve this leadership is we also need to show the political class that we can also be political. Let us now more than ever encourage as many people as possible, the new tax, the young tax that we are calling them, to come up and take leadership positions. I would like to see a Kenya where we have very, very young people at the national assemblies, as governors, as senators, in the leadership positions, and trying to now change from inside the system itself. I would like this change to come inside the system. It will never come outside the system. And as I close, I know right now the political class has regrouped, and we've seen that. They have regrouped, they're assembling themselves in one side. We also need a type of leadership. I know this is a topic for another day, another discussion, but we need to start thinking about it. We need also to start thinking about political parties ourselves. I know this is another topic for another day, but we need to start thinking about all this. We will be divided along tribal lines. And when they try to divide us along tribal lines, let us show them that we are proud of our diversity in ethnic and in our ethnical diversity, our cultural diversity, and religious diversity. We are proud of it. And therefore, we cannot be divided along those lines. So thank you very much, Eli, for hosting this space and for giving me a chance to speak in this space. Thank you very much.
Thank you, the real Joe. We also appreciate you coming on and definitely sharing on the Constitution and why we need to defend this document, even though there have been indications that some political voices are hinting at amending or completely, coming up with a new constitution because the COK 2010 looks like it is not serving the purpose that this country intended to have. And 14 years later, we have argued that it is still a good document, but there are voices that say no. It is time to look into this document, probably have a new constitution. I'm looking here at Ndolo Inzi, who says, let us not allow the current government to review or amend the COK 2010. Let the leaders, including the National Assembly, the Senate, the governors, and that is the Council of Governors for that matter, implement it in total. Asking this through NATO. Agostino is here, Babuino, Caleb Amisi, and Okio Mutata, who are joining the call, I think, from the peripheries. Thank you for that comment, Inzi. We also have Mr. Kabali wa Taifa, who says, the misconception Kenyans made is to assume a piece of paper of COK will straighten immorality of Kenyans, and that is entrepreneurship, among others. No, we needed first to sit down to build consensus among us Kenyans. How is our governance to be including democracy? That is punishment, morals, etc. That is from Stakabali Wataifa. I'll sample one more here from, let's see who is saying what. Wanda, thank you for making time, Teacher Wanda, who says corruption is a culture in Kenya. It has nothing to do with politicians. It is a lifestyle. Politicians to non-politicians actively amplify corruption so that even men and women in religion are good at this game. New culture needed. And also we have the United Green Movement here, I think, backing up their co-leader, saying the Constitution of Kenya 2010 sets out how we can achieve the Kenya we want. However, as a people, we must organize ourselves, elect good leaders, leaders who will bring the aspirations of COK to life, among other contributions. And last but not least, Mr. Kilimanjaro Waithaka says, well put, DJ Nick. The public sector is where the thieves come to clothe their wolf personality in sheepskins. The corporate players who venture into politics is to sanitize their ills. And one wonders, why is government corrupt? NATO, leadership aspects being brought to question. We look at corruption for that matter. We look at how a lot of persons within the political elite system have actually defiled this constitution, and Kenyans to some extent stating that we really have a document that we can work with and we don't need to change it for anybody or anyone. We just have to maintain the basic principles of what this constitution envisioned. Neto, your closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Eli and Obed and Mizani for hosting. I have a couple of responses to make before I make my closing remarks. But the first part is to thank you very much for allowing me to be guest speaker on this particular topic, which is very close to my heart, but also close to the principles that we believe in at the United Government Party. The United Government Party has one of its pillars as rule of law and constitutionalism. So this for us was really, really key to at least speak and listen to the aspirations of what other Kenyans are saying on the constitution. To my number one comment, which I want to respond to, is that everything rises and falls on leadership. The moment the presidency of this country will set the tone and the tenure that Kenya is a constitutional republic, that Kenya is corruption free, that Kenya needs to go in a certain way, everyone else will follow suit. We've seen it before when Kibaki tried it. People always talk about institutions like Singapore. If you see, it's the people like Lee Kuan Yew who set the tone of that particular administration. And if you see, wherever the countries have moved forward, leadership has a role in terms of what they play in making the institutions around the country inclusive, both economically and politically. So everything rises and falls in leadership. If we want to fix the country, we must fix its leadership, and more so its presidency, because that is where the tone and the tenure of where we want to live, move towards the country starts. That's the first thing. The second thing, I want to echo what Betty, Real Joe, and a couple of people have said in this particular call. As a people, we've seen where we need to take our country. We must organize, and organizing politically. Let's not just organize in specific spaces. Let's look for men and women across the country who need to run for office. If Betty is a good candidate to run, if it's Real Joe, if it's DJ Nick, if it's Obed, let's put our heads, support, organize men and women who we think need to run the country, as opposed to sitting in, and agonizing. The third thing, the Constitution of Kenya 2010 was done at a time when Kenya was having a critical juncture. You remember the fight we had in the post-election violence? Kenya needed to move forward, and the Constitution 2010 did a very good thing. We have yet another critical juncture that has been created by the Gen Z movement. The Gen Zs are wanting Kenya to move to a space where corruption, rule of law, good governance are the norm. Let us not drop the ball at this particular point. Let's keep pushing until we reach and realize that particular rebirth in this particular country. I would like to say that rule of law is achievable in Kenya, and politics of poverty, which is what the most politicians have done for the longest, is because they know necessitous persons, if we are lacking, that is what dictatorships are made of. They will want to make us lack so that at least they can dictate upon us. So we must always make sure that we keep going. The other thing, the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, in my view, is the lowest problem we have right now. It's one of the many challenges we have in this country. But my studies of governance show me, whenever you see an Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission in any country, just know they're not fighting corruption. That country thrives then in corruption. So part of the institutions you need to deal with when one of you become president is the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, because it's not serving the purpose that it's supposed to be doing. In fact, we really need to have ethics, a major part with anti-corruption is not doing. What have we Kenyans done over the past few days, which is very good? The civic awareness and the promotion that we've been doing is awesome. We need to continue educating the masses in terms of what needs to be done, their rights, what the Constitution says, and what they need to do. That leads me to the point which I said before, that the judiciary therefore is going to be the weakest link in terms of helping us realize our constitutional aspirations. Because you see, once the citizens, for example, know the demands that we need to make, we really need then the judiciary to make them justiciable. To the extent that the judiciary is going to sleep on the job like they're doing right now, they're going to be one of the weakest links in terms of where we need to move forward. The last comment I'd like to make before I make my closing remarks is that young people need to go for elective positions. Anyone on this call who has political ambitions, the time is now. You need to start preparing for the election whenever it's going to happen, and make sure that we're looking for men and women and men of character who live the aspirations of Chapter 6 of the Constitution of Kenya. My closing remarks. Number one, I think one of the things we need to do as a people is to really to go again to this judiciary that I've mentioned for an interpretation of how the Kenyan people can exercise their sovereign power directly. I say that, and I'd like to expound. Whereas Article 1 in the Constitution says that the people of Kenya can exercise their sovereign power directly, part of the challenges is that the how to do is not been explicitly mentioned in the constitution. So I really think one of the constitutional, as we celebrate the constitution and its rebirth on 20 Katiba Day, we must really then ask ourselves, we really need to get a Supreme Court help us with an advisor in terms of how can, for example, Kenyans who want to exercise their powers directly with regard to the executive, with regard to the judiciary, and with regard to the legislature, how can they do that? That's the first thing I'd like to comment on. The second thing I'd like to say is that Kenyans really need to test the population initiative amendment provisions under the constitution with regard to structuring the government in the way that we want it. The third thing, Chapter 6, corruption and rule of law. Kenyans must keep making demands of the leaders we have to make sure that they aspire to the aspirations of Chapter 6. Because if we just did that, if we just made comments, the courts have let us down, the vetting provisions have let us down. The IBC, for example, has cleared people who are outrightly corrupt. The courts have refused to stop those who are outrightly corrupt from running for office. I think Kenyans need to keep pushing and making demands. On the last part, in terms of how would we do to achieve or celebrate properly the Constitution Act 14. Parliament was declared unconstitutional by Chief Justice Maraga in sometime in 2020. I think as one of the things to give a spirit of rebirth to this constitution is I think all Kenyans need to demand that this particular parliament is dissolved because it's unconstitutional. It goes counter to Article 261, which Parliament should have been making laws to give effect to the Truth Agenda rule, to give effect to the Article 100 with regard to minorities, persons with disability, youth, and women. It has failed to do that. So this Parliament is unconstitutional. How do we best celebrate the 14th anniversary of this particular constitution? It is by joining the call to have this particular Parliament dissolved. The Chief Justice has taken it for too long, and we really think that if anything else, someone asked in this constitution, 2027 is too far, it's too long. We must make sure that we make demands that this particular constitution this particular parliament is dissolved because it's unconstitutional and it should not even last until 2027. On the last comment, yes, it is true we should not allow this particular parliament to touch or amend any part of this constitution because if they do it, they're going to be doing it in a way that is going to remove fundamental rights. Should we, like I think we should, and I believe that we have push for this parliament to be dissolved before 2027, the next parliament, which is going to be full of good men and women, I think must do a couple of things. Number one is we must make for the demands of the implementation of Chapter 6. We must always make sure that Chapter 6 is our Northern Star, where everyone else who comes into office, everything else is done in reliance with what Chapter 6 is based on. Meritocracy, respect for office, dignity, and everything else. The second thing we need to put into that constitution when we now, in the future, is Kenya needs to choose whether we want to have a proportional representation system of government as opposed to first past the post. That is a conversation for another day, Mizani, if you want us to have it, in terms of what would be the best structure of elections for Kenya. Because right now, the first past the post system is not working. Where a president is president with a difference of 200,000 votes, the person who comes number two then is in the streets hovering around looking for how to cohabit in a government. I think it's not fair. We really need to see that the numbers count in an election. So a proportional representation system of government in a country that like Kenya then needs to be thought through. Lastly, Kenya needs to agree when we discuss this constitution again whether Kenya wants to be a presidential system of structure or a parliamentary system. Because right now, the mongrel we have creates a lot of confusion. They do not even know if they're in the opposition, whether they're in government, where they are. They don't know whether they're in the bedroom or outside. So we really, really need to have a structure that helps Kenyans understand that in a presidential system of government, yes, you have a president and you have this is what it's going to do. In a parliamentary system, you have a shadow cabinet and that is what it needs to do. So once that is very clear, we'll really be having a good constitutional document. I thank you so much for having us here. And we look forward to the 27th of August, a good celebration when we wish our Katiba 14th anniversary. It has done very well in serving us so far, especially in the places of fundamental rights, but we have to keep pushing so that we realize the Kenya that we want. Thank you very much and have yourselves a good Sunday and a good week.
Thank you very much, Agostino Neto. And Neto here is a co-leader at the United Green Movement Party, and says everything about them is green. I believe he believes in the aspect of nature taking care of us and not the opposite. So if we are within those confines, we want to state that Kenya will be having a new constitution celebration but that is 14 years later. Is there something to smile about? Definitely, there have been a lot of wins and some stock to take into account. But that being said, Obed, I'm thinking Neto just asked you for another space. And on Mondays, we do have our evening Kamkunjis that happen from 8 p.m. I'll let you do the drum meeting and maybe convince him to come and give us the next step of part two of this conversation. Obed, the mic is yours. General remarks and final remarks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone who's taken time to be here. So it's a pleasure hosting you and getting to hear what we as a people aspire for and, get inspired by. Good to have very good speakers and nice to see that, it's not easy to sit through a conversation sometimes when you're not directly engaged, but it tells us that there's something that we Kenyans want to achieve for ourselves. So many things have been said. And when you look at we've had a problem with the political class, but we also need to introspect, accept that probably we need to start somewhere as a people. We need to reevaluate our value system, including the people who are moralists in quote, or people who the religious people. So we would be having most likely a second part of this space, and we'd like to welcome everyone. Also to remind you that at Mizani 254, every opinion, as long as it respects other people, it's factual and objective, we do not have a problem having anybody here. Whether you have a divergent opinion or not, we are agreeable, and that's why we call them conversations. We are looking forward to having a Kenya that has people who are informed, and other than just talking, we walk the talk. That's why we endeavor in our small way that we make contributions. We send memoranda. We have made some, demands for some explanations for things that have to be done. For instance, we did have make a demand to KWS. They need to clarify whether what's going on at Savo East National Park in terms of is there mining going on, or what is exactly going on in the park. You also realize we've had something people have had every time there's a conversation here. There's something about EACC. We did have a space on corruption, and EACC invited themselves, and happily for us, there's a lot that was canvassed. There was a report that we did, and I think we're looking forward to having another conversation where probably the EACC has to put and give a perspective and clearly tell us where exactly they are, what are their challenges, and what needs to be done. I also think we've had influence indirectly. The Nairobi County government recently had a draft tourism policy where we engaged them, and we did a report. And part of their decision is that they have what you call now they're using the digital space as part of the public participation. So I think it's a good step in a good direction. You also part of the report that we did for ESCC. We are glad to mention that the president did pick something in terms of witness protection, and a few other suggestions were put out there. So in our small way, we're making contribution, and we are happy because you participate and you're helping us to do that. And let us all do this together. Mizani, if there's anything I've forgotten, is just to say that we are preaching to the choir already. And Kenyans know what it is that we want, but sometimes it's really how. Because we have tried. And I think the only thing I would encourage us is to stop focusing on individuals in terms of wewe sijui nini ulipewa nini. Let Kenyans know that the enemy is one. The enemy is bad governance. The enemy is that we are not able to get value for what we get in terms of taxes. Kenyans pay lots of taxes, but we're not getting value for that. If we can demand and without ceasing, don't stop. Don't tell us about bedroom issues of other people. Talk about real issues. People can do what they want to do as long as our services are met. As a Kenyan, I want to go to hospital and get medication and get whatever I need to get. I want to go to a school and everything is functioning. A functional system, people can do whatever they want to do in terms of their morals. And that's what we need to demand from ourselves. So thank you very much. And Eli, without belaboring the point and sometimes going over the top, I think that's what I can say. And thank you, everyone, for finding time to be here. Let's do this. Let's demand for more from our government, from those that we have put in leadership. If they're not doing their job, let's make it uncomfortable for them, because that's what we should do. We have employed them. They are our employees. It is us to tell them what to do. If they can't do it the right way, then they have no use being in that office. Thank you very much, Mizani.
Thank you very much, Obed. And clearly, as you put, we try our best to put in the work and ensure we follow up on some of the issues you get to raise on these spaces. Exactly like you put it, the ESCC has been on the receiving end, especially on matters to fight corruption, among others, accusations that are levied. And we have taken an initiative actually to approach the commission to see if we can have a serious conversation on what is happening and what they are doing, and the Kenyans, what Kenyans need to know about EACC, specifically on the issues that you keep raising on the integrity matters. And therefore, once this is settled, I don't want to preempt or go way ahead of the conversation. But in fact, we are looking to have a session with the EACC and say, ask EACC, so that you can bring all the questions and concerns you have about this commission and this country and the leaders that you perceive to be, quote unquote, either immoral or whatever it is, and they are in office because they have stolen public funds and they have brought this country to shame. We had intended to end this talk at 45 past midday. However, we'll be having another 3 minutes from Dr. Kuro Okot to give him an opportunity to make his opening and closing remarks. Having been part and parcel of the conversation around the Constitution 2010 making process and its birth, I will allow him, Daktari, a few more
So,
minutes to make a
Mizani, I
statement.
don't want to take any more time. I appreciate that I joined the conversation very late. But just to say that I think the idea of a new constitution right now, I think for me is not ripe. We need to, of course, I've heard you guys talk about enforcement, implementation, and actually there are just two things I want to propose. And this is a conversation we will not complete today. I'm looking forward to the next conversation. Number one, we need to begin to really deconstruct chapter 6 on leadership and integrity. Because who are the people really we're entrusting our public spaces, our public office to leaders? When you have, say, someone like Speaker Otangula purporting to interrogate the CSS before they are appointed, and he doesn't really interrogate them in the context of an advocate to say, okay, give us evidence of how your wealth almost doubled just 2 years down the line. So, and I think that leads me to the next question. I mean, before I go to my next issue, we need to begin to talk about the soul of our nation, because I honestly feel there's a problem with the Kenyan national psyche. Why did we give ourselves a developmental, a fairly progressive constitution? And I'm not saying this because I was in the team that wrote this country's constitution, but our constitution is fairly progressive, and many people are actually emulating and studying Kenya's constitution. Why is it that we cannot put right people in positions of leadership? I think it's a question about the soul of our nation that we need to interrogate. Number two, Mizani, I just want to propose, for purposes of tomorrow's debate or another day, please let's stop talking about corruption. That word corruption is being corrupted so that we do not relate to it in the way in which we understand it from our mother tongue. Let's call it theft of public resources, because then we can catch thieves of public resources and prosecute them. Kwa hivyo tuachane na hii story sijui ati ya corruption. That corruption word is an imperialist, globalist invention so that we are not able to catch the real thieves of our public resources. When you steal money from KEMSA, from the health sector, from the education, you have actually stolen. And in fact, you are a mass murderer. Because you are affecting many lives. So those are my 2 cents in this conversation. Sorry, I came in too late, but I'm sure the conversation will not stop here. Thank you.
Indeed, Dr. The conversation does not end here. And you correctly put it. We are dealing with thieves and mass murderers. And that's what we need to discuss. Obeds and the team will definitely be drawing up the conversation for tomorrow. I am very positive at 8 p.m. we'll be live, and we are having part 2 of this talk. What I can also assure all the listeners and the plenary is that every single statement that you put up here will be put into a report that we are coming up with. And hopefully these reports will help formulate national conversation on the Kenya we want, and Kenya, rebirth of a nation that we call the country Kenya. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I want to take this opportunity once again to thank all our guest speakers. That is Nato Agostino, and in absentia, we had Bonnie Mwangi. Bonnie has been working around the clock to really do what we will call public auditing of the audits that have been brought us to the public, published by the Auditor General, and just questioning how we lose so much money in the presence of an existing parliament, in existing institutions that are supposed to be the ones protecting the interests of Kenyans, especially the resources of the Kenyan people. And this, to some extent, creating an awareness of the bigger problems we are dealing with as a country. Net, on the other hand, I keep referring to him as a co-leader, but I look at him as a national leader who is passionate about the rule of law, among other issues, including the political landscape of this country. And Nato, we thank you for taking your time to be here. We also had a last timer here with Betty Okero. Betty, again, we want to appreciate you for making time to be here. From the civil society space, of course, advocating for the rights of people within the grassroots levels, and ensuring that she advocates for the voices of those who have been silenced and cannot speak on their behalf. She makes sure she brings these voices to the national platform. And for that, we do want to appreciate you, Real Joe. Thank you so much for making time. Again, questioning just how we look at the Constitution and the powers that come with it. And of course, the missing gaps that we need to look into as we celebrate or commemorate 14 years after we gave ourselves this Constitution. Ladies and gentlemen, the Mizani Spaces continue this coming Monday. And Obeds, if that is affirmative, we are looking forward to have a very engaging session with all of you. Make time to be there at 8 p.m. East African time. My good friend Redemptor, we will be talking about the brutalities. That is both the socio-economic aspect, the political, and of course, people who have been killed by police officers in the name of maintaining peace. Why do we speak about peace and justice? Remains an elusive conversation in our national discourse. My name is Likiani Eli. On behalf of Mizani 254, we wish you a great weekend ahead. See you when you see us. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.